Hi guys, tonight we take a slow walk back into a world where the air is sharp, the walls are stone, and the job of keeping watch in the dark might just cost you your fingers if you're careless. You're standing at the base of a medieval castle tower, torchlight flickering above you, wind whistling through gaps in the battlements. The stones under your boots are icy, the kind of cold that seeps straight into the bones. You probably won't survive this night if you don't think ahead. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is right now. Now, dim the lights, let your eyes grow heavy, and imagine yourself trudging up those spiral steps, each one colder than the last, until you reach the guard post high above the courtyard. The first thing you notice is the stillness. A medieval castle after dark is quieter than you might expect, yet never truly silent. Horses snort in their stalls, dogs growl faintly when the wind shifts, and from the kitchens far below, a lingering smell of charred meat still drifts. The sentry you are replacing rubs his arms briskly, his teeth chattering as he warns you, "Keep moving, or the cold will eat you alive," and that is no exaggeration. In a time before central heating, even the most lavish castle was a drafty shell compared to what you know today. Guards on duty lived with the knowledge that cold nights could be just as lethal as an enemy arrow. So how did they manage to snatch sleep, to keep warm enough that exhaustion didn't overtake them? One mainstream historical fact is that castles were designed with defense, not comfort in mind. Thick stone walls did insulate against heat in summer, but they also trapped icy dampness in winter. Those stones bled chill into every room. Modern engineers measuring temperatures in preserved keeps have found that, even with a roaring fire, the upper chambers rarely rose above what you might consider a brisk spring morning. But here's a quirky tidbit. Guards sometimes tucked hot stones wrapped in cloth into their bedding, a medieval version of your hot water bottle. The trick only lasted an hour or two, but it gave just enough warmth for a soldier to drift off before his body adjusted. The stones were heated in the kitchens or hearths, then carried upstairs carefully to avoid burns. Imagine clutching one under layers of rough wool, the heat fading slowly as your dreams begin. Historians still argue whether night watchmen truly slept inside their posts, or if strict captains demanded that they remain standing, pacing to stay alert. Written orders often forbid dozing, yet numerous accounts describe men found curled in corners, cloaks pulled over their heads. It seems that fatigue always found a way, and when it did, guards developed countless strategies to survive the bitter air. Close your eyes now and picture a narrow guard room at the top of a tower. Two men huddle on a straw mattress pushed against the wall, boots still on, cloaks wrapped tight. The mattress itself is thin, the straw flattened after weeks of use, but it lifts them just enough off the stone floor to keep from losing all their warmth. Above them, a tiny slit in the wall admits a faint draft, enough to whistle softly like a distant flute. One man pulls his hood low over his face, the other murmurs a prayer against frostbite. Their breaths mingle, forming little clouds that drift and vanish in the half-darkness. The sensation of cold here is not dramatic, not the kind that freezes you instantly. It is relentless, a slow creeping numbness. Fingers stiffen, toes ache, and every gust through the cracks feels like the touch of an invisible thief stealing your body heat. You shift under your cloak, searching for a position where the chill doesn't gnaw at your bones. Your companion rolls closer, and you allow it without complaint. Warmth is warmth, pride be damned. The rhythm of the castle itself helps you rest. Bells mark the hours, the soft clank of chains as a drawbridge is checked, the occasional bark of a dog. Each sound reassures you that life continues outside your small cocoon. You tuck your hands into your armpits, breathe against the wool of your cloak, and count heartbeats. For a while, you forget the cold. Some guards had it worse, stationed atop exposed walls where no fire could be lit. There, men might stamp their feet constantly, swinging arms in great circles to keep blood flowing. Those poor souls often slept only in snatches when relieved, sometimes collapsing onto bare planks. The lucky ones rotated quickly, an hour or two awake, then a chance to warm up near a brazier in the tower room. But unlucky watchmen lingered longer, and stories abound of men found stiff, frozen mid-shift. Whether all of these tales are true or embellished, they remind you just how thin the margin was between life and death on a medieval night. In such a place, every detail mattered. The way you layered your tunic and woolen shirt, whether your boots were stuffed with dry straw, if you remembered to pull the bedding up to your chin. Forget one step, and you might wake with frost on your eyebrows or a deep cough that never quite left your lungs. Even now, archaeologists studying castle remains sometimes find soot traces in the most unexpected corners, hinting that fires were lit where official rules said they shouldn't be. That soot is testimony to desperate men who chose the risk of fire over the certainty of freezing. As you imagine yourself settling in, the stone pressing its cold through the straw beneath you, think about how fragile comfort was. No feather mattress, no glass window, no thermostat waiting for your touch. Just layers of wool, a fading hot stone, and the closeness of another guard breathing beside you. You pull your cloak tighter, listen to the sigh of the wind through arrow slits, and drift slowly, reluctantly, into uneasy sleep. You wake in that half-dreamy state where you're not quite sure if the cold is inside your bones or only brushing along the skin. The guard captain has already come and gone, leaving behind only the echo of his boots on stone steps. What lingers now is the draft every medieval castle, no matter how noble, had it. You can imagine a grand hall full of banners, the kind you see in films, but the truth is that the walls were not sealed like modern brickwork. They breathed, they leaked. And for a guard trying to sleep, those drafty cracks were not just inconvenient, they were relentless. A mainstream historical fact is that castles were built for defense above all. Their thick stone walls, often 2 or 3 meters across at the base, were designed to resist catapults, not winter winds. You might think those stones acted as insulation, but they behaved more like a sponge, soaking up cold and slowly radiating it inward. On damp nights, the moisture clung to the masonry so that a wall almost sweated, chilling anyone who leaned against it. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some guards jammed moss or even wool scraps into gaps between stones to block drafts. It wasn't elegant, and it certainly wasn't in any building manual, but those improvised patches turned icy gusts into tolerable whispers. Imagine crouching down with a lump of sheep's wool in your hand, stuffing it into a crack like a squirrel hiding a nut, hoping it might save your toes from another freezing night. Still, historians continue to debate whether draftiness was worse in the towers or the great halls. Some argue the halls, with their cavernous ceilings, lost heat far more quickly. Others insist the towers, exposed on all sides to wind, were harsher. Both could be brutal. You can almost hear the whistle of air through a murder hole or the hiss through an unshuttered arrow slit. As you lie on your bedding, the rushes beneath you shift with each breeze, carrying the smell of damp straw and the faint aroma of last week's spilled ale. It is not an unpleasant smell, exactly, but earthy, reminding you that comfort here is fragile. You tuck your cloak closer and pull your hood lower over your ears, yet the draft still finds you. It snakes along your neck, teases at your ankles, and makes you shiver in spite of yourself. The sensory world is alive around you. A rat scurries in the corner, its nails ticking lightly on stone. Somewhere below, a door creaks as a sleepy cook stirs the banked fire in the kitchen. From your narrow slit window, the faintest moonlight spills in, silvering the dust motes in the air. You shift, press your back against the wall, and instantly regret it. The stone is colder than the bedding. You roll away quickly, muttering a curse under your breath. Practical men found ways to cheat the draft, hanging heavy cloth along walls, even in humble guard rooms, could create a buffer zone. Thick tapestries served the nobility, but for soldiers it might be rough woolen blankets nailed at the corners. The difference between bare stone and fabric was enormous. The cloth captured heat from breath and bodies, softening the air. Without it, the draft licked along every seam. And you realize that it is not the strength of the cold that wears you down, but its persistence. It never stops. A gust at midnight, another at 2. By dawn, it feels as though the chill has been dripping into you for hours, drop by drop, like a leaking roof soaking through your cloak. Close your eyes now, and imagine the rhythm. Gust, sigh, shiver, shift, over and over. You doze, wake, turn, and drift again. The draft keeps you from plunging into deep sleep, but it also becomes part of the castle's voice, reminding you that you are never entirely sheltered. The castle itself seems to whisper in your ear, as if saying, "You may guard me, but I decide how warm you stay." There's another thought that slips in, perhaps not every guard dreaded the draft equally. Some men, hardened by outdoor labor before they ever joined a garrison, might have found the stone room no worse than a field. Others, raised in warmer lands and stationed far from home, may have cursed the northern winds more bitterly than any sword wound. Historians still puzzle over these personal differences, because the records speak of punishments for sleeping on watch, but rarely tell us how a man actually felt about the cold gnawing at him each night. So you tuck yourself tighter, imagine stuffing moss into a crack, and pull the cloak over your face until only your nose peeks out for air. The stone sighs, the draft continues, and your body finally yields to exhaustion. Sleep comes, shallow but steady, carrying you further into the long night where even dreams carry the echo of whistling wind through drafty cracks. You stir awake, rubbing your arms as if the motion alone could summon heat, and reach for the layers that keep you from shivering yourself into misery. In a place without central heating, your best defense is what you wear and how you arrange it. A well-documented reality is that medieval people were masters of layering. A guard might begin with a simple linen shirt, then add a woolen tunic, and on top of that, perhaps another cloak thrown over his shoulders. Each piece on its own was modest, but stacked together they created a patchwork shield against the night. There is something rather unexpected in the way clothing doubled as bedding. Soldiers often slept without removing much of their outerwear at all. Boots stayed on, hoods stayed pulled tight, belts loosened only slightly. In fact, some men carried their spare garments not in chests, but draped around them while they slept. Imagine nodding off in your full kit, every layer stiff with sweat and smoke, yet still grateful, because each stitch held in another breath of warmth. And the scholars remain divided about just how effective those layers were. Some argue that coarse medieval wool, thicker and oilier than the refined cloth you might picture, was nearly waterproof and excellent at trapping heat. Others point out that dampness ruined it quickly, leaving guards with sodden, heavy tunics that chilled them even further. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in between. A man who kept his gear dry slept tolerably, while one caught in a rainstorm suffered all night. Close your eyes now and feel the scratch of homespun wool against your skin, not soft like modern sweaters but coarse, with fibers that itch at the neck. You tug at the collar, wishing for comfort, but you know that scratch is the price of warmth. Over it hangs another layer, heavier, carrying the faint smell of sheep still embedded in the fibers. You burrow down, pulling cloak overhead, and the scratch turns into a cocoon. The sensory world of such clothing was layered not just in fabric but in experience. Linen carried the smell of lye from harsh washing. Wool smelled of lanolin and smoke from the last watchfire. Leather straps creaked faintly as you shifted. To a tired guard, these smells and sounds became as familiar as lullabies, small reminders of protection against the cold. It is easy to think of clothing as fashion, but here it is survival. The layers turn your body into its own furnace, each garment trapping air warmed by your breath and blood. You curl tighter, conserving that warmth, and listen to the faint breathing of another man across the chamber doing exactly the same thing. One more detail. Not all guards had equal access to layers. Wealthier soldiers, or those in the retinues of nobles, might be issued lined cloaks trimmed with fur. Poorer men made do with what they owned, sometimes patching rags together to mimic a tunic. Imagine two men sharing a watch, one in a fine, heavy cloak, another in a threadbare shirt, and picture how differently they felt the bite of the night air. Even so, the principle of layering worked for both. Add one piece, trap a little more warmth, remove one, and you invited the night in. So you tuck your hands into your sleeves, pull the hood down to shadow your face, and curl under your layered armor of cloth. The wind whispers outside, but for a moment you are safe, wrapped in the slow, steady warmth that only many layers can build. You stir again, this time pressing your face against something softer than wool, a pelt, heavy and faintly musky. When linen and wool are not enough, animal skins step in as nature's insulation. From fox to bear, from sheep to deer, hides were pulled into guardrooms and draped over bodies like the night's last defense. Chronicles consistently mention that fur cloaks were prized by soldiers who could get them, not only for warmth but also for the status they signaled. A thick wolf pelt thrown across your shoulders did more than keep you alive. It told others that you were not just any watchman, but one with means or luck. There's something rather curious about how far men went to secure such comfort. Accounts survive of guards stripping hides from recently hunted game and throwing them, bloody and stiff, directly onto bedding for insulation. Imagine lying under a half-cured deer skin, the smell pungent and the texture rough, yet knowing it meant you would wake alive. Not elegant, not fragrant, but practical in the most desperate way. Debate lingers among modern historians about whether fur was common among ordinary garrisons or largely reserved for nobles and their household guards. Some argue that pelts were abundant in colder regions, making them available to nearly everyone. Others maintain that common soldiers had little chance of owning fine furs, relying instead on scraps of hide or second-hand pieces patched together. The truth may have varied by region, but the yearning for fur warmth was universal. As you close your eyes, picture yourself burrowing under a sheepskin. The wool side faces inward, scratchy but warm, while the leather side stiffens against the damp. You inhale, catching a faint lanolin tang mixed with smoke from last night's hearth. The weight presses down pleasantly, a reminder that nature itself wraps you like a blanket. The sensory impression is powerful. Your fingers trace the uneven surface of a tanned hide, rough patches alternating with softer tufts. The pelt smells of earth, of animal life, of survival. You think briefly of the creature it once belonged to, then let the thought fade as your own breath fogs in the dark chamber. In some castles, records note that guards even used furs stolen from defeated foes. A pelt taken from an enemy's camp might later serve as bedding in a drafty tower. A trophy, perhaps, but more importantly, a lifesaver on a frigid night. The boundary between luxury and necessity blurred fur was both wealth and warmth, dignity and defense. Not every soldier had access to a pelt, of course. The less fortunate curled beneath nothing more than straw and wool, envying the man beside him with a fox fur blanket. Yet the principle remained. Animal skins gave life when stone walls threatened to steal it away. So you pull the pelt tighter around you, letting its weight anchor you, muffling the moans of the wind outside. For a few blessed hours, you sink into a deeper slumber, trusting that the warmth of an animal long gone will carry you through until dawn's pale light creeps over the battlements. You shift again, this time against something crinkly and uneven. It rustles under your weight and releases a smell so earthy you could almost be lying in a barn. That's because you are resting on one of the most common sleeping arrangements for guards in medieval castles: rushes, straw, or hay spread across a wooden frame or, more often, directly on the cold flagstones. Chroniclers consistently describe that garrisons slept on makeshift pallets, stuffed with whatever dry vegetation was available, changed occasionally, and left to flatten under weeks of weary bodies. It's worth pausing on what these rustic beds were actually like. A wooden bedstead was a luxury. Many guards knew only a crude sack stuffed with straw, sometimes called a palliasse. The sack itself might be stitched from rough linen or canvas, and once filled, it was tied shut and laid on the floor. At first, the straw crunched softly, providing spring and a little insulation from the stones beneath. But with each night, it compacted, until eventually you were lying on a lumpy mat that felt more like a pile of sticks. Some men solved this by topping it with fresh rushes every few nights, though in poorer garrisons the same bedding lingered for months, becoming musty, alive with insects, and hardly restful at all. Something rather curious appears in a few records. Guards sometimes mixed dried herbs into their bedding. Lavender, mint, or wormwood was scattered among the straw, partly to mask the musty smell and partly to ward off pests. Imagine crawling into your straw sack, tired to the bone, and being greeted by the faint, calming scent of lavender, a small comfort in a world otherwise defined by cold stone and creaking wood. Whether it worked or not against lice, the fragrance was a kind of psychological blanket, soothing enough to let sleep come. But modern experts disagree about how hygienic these arrangements truly were. Some argue that, since rushes were replaced regularly in castle halls and guard chambers, the bedding remained tolerable. Others maintain that guards rarely had the luxury of frequent replacement, leaving them to sleep amid damp, flea-ridden straw. The scholarly consensus is far from settled, because written sources often ignore the details of lowly soldiers' beds. Archaeology gives us only hints pollen residues found in castle floors, suggesting the kinds of plants brought indoors. Close your eyes now and imagine yourself lying on such bedding. The straw crackles faintly as you shift, each stem poking into your side or scratching the skin beneath your tunic. The smell is rich, a mixture of earth, dried grass, and faint animal musk. You tug your cloak tighter, using it as a blanket, and feel the straw prickle through the weave. There is no feather bed softness, no even surface, only lumps that press into you, reshaped again and again as your tired body seeks a comfortable hollow. The sensory experience is vivid. Your ear rests against straw, and you hear the faint hiss of it shifting with each breath. Tiny fragments of stalk cling to your hair. Dust rises when you cough, catching in your throat. Yet despite the discomfort, warmth seeps slowly upward. The straw, thin as it seems, lifts you off the stone, preventing the chill of the floor from draining all your heat. It is imperfect, but it is survival. In the corner, another guard mutters in his sleep, turning heavily on his own pallet. You can hear the straw beneath him sigh and shift, then fall silent again. Around you, the room smells of sweat, wool, and the grassy bedding. For a moment, you could almost imagine yourself in a hayloft back on the farm, rather than inside a fortress built for war. That familiarity is comforting. Some guard rooms were placed near storerooms or granaries, meaning fresh straw was readily available. In such cases, bedding might be replenished often, giving soldiers a slightly better chance of avoiding pests. Others, stationed in remote towers, made do with whatever dry rushes could be cut from marshes nearby. In winter, when gathering was difficult, straw beds grew thin, and guards huddled even closer together for warmth. The arrangement of bedding could vary too. Sometimes, straw was spread directly on the floor in communal piles. Guards would collapse into them shoulder to shoulder, cloaks pulled over heads, a scene more like a kennel than a barracks. At other times, individuals had their own sacks, slightly more private but still far from luxurious. In either case, the constant sound of rustling filled the chamber each time someone moved. It is easy to forget that straw bedding carried symbolic weight as well. In medieval imagination, straw was associated with humility and hardship. Jesus was said to have been born among it. Peasants lived their whole lives upon it, and soldiers resting on it embodied sacrifice. To lie on straw was to be reminded of your station. You were not noble, not royal, but one of the countless men keeping watch, half forgotten in the footnotes of history. One peculiar note comes from a French chronicle describing guards tossing their straw out the window after a siege, believing that the bedding had absorbed bad spirits of hunger and fear. Was it superstition, or just a way to rid themselves of fleas? Perhaps both. Superstition often mingled with practicality, and in this case, the ritual cleansing also meant fresher bedding for the next night. As you drift on your own lumpy mattress, the uneven comfort shapes your dreams. Sometimes you imagine yourself on a meadow under stars, the straw crackling beneath like summer grass. Other times you feel the weight of the stone walls pressing in, and the straw seems no more than a fragile shield against the cold earth. Yet always, it is what stands between you and freezing. Think about that as you curl tighter. Every stalk matters. Every handful piled beneath you is one more barrier against the hungry chill of stone. You close your eyes, listen to the rustle, and let the uneven rhythm of straw lull you back into the uneasy but essential sleep of a medieval guard. You roll over, and this time what saves you from shivering isn't straw, nor wool, nor fur, it's the warmth of another body close by. For all the layers and bedding in the world, sometimes the only true shield against the medieval chill was another human being. Chronicles often remind us that soldiers rarely slept alone, especially in guard rooms. Whether in twos or in larger groups, men huddled together out of necessity, letting body heat mingle under shared cloaks or blankets. It might feel awkward by modern standards, but in the heart of a frozen tower, pride had little place. One well-documented reality is that communal sleeping was standard across medieval society, not just among guards. Families in peasant huts piled into the same bed, children tucked between parents, to maximize warmth. In inns, strangers often slept side by side, sometimes with nothing separating them but a thin sheet. Guards followed the same pattern. You can picture 2 or 3 soldiers wrapped in one large blanket, shoulders touching, legs tangled, breathing the same frosty air but finding comfort in each other's presence. An odd little custom worth noting is the bundling cloak. Instead of each man having his own, 2 guards would wrap themselves together in one oversized cloak, binding it tight with a belt so that neither could roll away. Imagine trying to sleep that way, face pressed against another's shoulder, sharing breath, hearing every snore but also knowing the shared heat meant survival. If you drifted a little closer in the night, no one complained. Better cramped than frozen. Academic circles have long disagreed about how common this practice truly was among professional garrisons. Some argue it was universal, citing accounts from Northern Europe, where temperatures regularly dropped below freezing inside castle walls. Others suggest that while peasants and poor soldiers may have shared bedding, elite guards, especially those in noble households, were given individual pallets, both for dignity and for discipline. Yet even in noble circles, stories survive of knights sleeping 2 or 3 to a bed when campaigning. So perhaps the line between necessity and choice blurred when the cold set in. Picture the scene. A small guard chamber, its only light the red glow of a dying brazier. 4 men lie side by side on straw mats, cloaks overlapping. One mutters in his sleep, another coughs. Their shoulders touch, their knees bump, their arms occasionally brush. The air smells of sweat, leather, and damp wool, but in the press of bodies there is comfort. Outside, the wind howls through arrow slits, but inside, you feel a bubble of warmth where breath and body mingle. The sensation of shared warmth is unlike anything else. You feel it first at the points of contact where a comrade's arm brushes yours, where his knee presses lightly against your side. Slowly, the heat radiates, filling the space between you, softening the icy air. The sound of his breathing becomes a lullaby, steady and reassuring. You close your eyes, and for the first time tonight you almost forget the stone walls around you. There's also the matter of safety. Sleeping together didn't just keep men warm, it kept them alert. If one stirred restlessly, others noticed. If someone grew dangerously cold, his companions could shake him awake, preventing frostbite or worse. In this way, shared warmth doubled as a system of mutual protection. You were never entirely alone in the night watch. Some descriptions even hint at guards sleeping with their dogs pressed against them, the animals tucked under blankets like comrades. A dog's body heat was considerable, and its growl at the slightest disturbance made it an ideal bedfellow. Between men and animals, the practice of bundling together created a living furnace in the draftiest tower. Not every soldier welcomed it, of course. Imagine being crammed between two snorers after a long day of drilling. The straw beneath you rustles, the cloaks above you shift, and you can't roll away without losing precious warmth. It is claustrophobic, uncomfortable, and at times undignified. Yet most accepted it, because the alternative solitude in the cold was far worse. The psychology of such closeness mattered too. In a time when camaraderie was the backbone of survival, sleeping shoulder to shoulder built trust. You depended on each other not just with swords in daylight, but with shared body heat at night. Bonds were forged in that proximity, in the quiet hours when men breathed the same air and endured the same discomforts. That intimacy, however unromantic, was part of the soldier's life. And so you close your eyes again, letting the weight of another's arm brush against yours, feeling his warmth seeping through cloaks. The cold hasn't vanished, but it has retreated to the corners of the room, pushed back by the shared furnace of human bodies. You drift, half listening to the snores and murmurs, knowing that in this small cocoon of comradeship, you will not freeze tonight. For a fleeting moment, you even feel grateful. Grateful for the awkward closeness, for the scratchy cloaks, for the breath of another man on your cheek, because it means life. In the long history of guard rooms, this simple act of bundling together saved countless lives, even if few chroniclers cared enough to write it down in detail. So you tuck your cloak tighter around both of you, surrender to the rhythm of shared breathing, and let sleep claim you once more, carried on the warmth of comradeship that no draught can fully extinguish. The warmth of comrades fades as the watch bell sounds again, and you shift toward another form of comfort, the glowing heart of a portable fire, in the darkest guard chambers of a medieval castle, where stone pressed in like an icy tomb, the humble brazier or coal pan stood as a stubborn spark against the cold. We know from castle inventories that such portable heat sources were not rare. Braziers of iron or bronze, filled with glowing coals, could be carried up winding stairs to the guard rooms, where men gathered around them as moths to a candle. Something rather unexpected in the record is that these braziers were sometimes nothing more than a bucket of sand with hot coals poured on top. A soldier could drag it into his corner, set his boots near it, and pray the embers glowed long enough to thaw frozen toes. Yet this convenience carried peril. A coal pan could smoulder too long, filling a closed chamber with choking smoke, or worse, catch the rushes on fire. Imagine drifting into uneasy sleep and waking to sparks snapping in the straw beside you, terror mixing with cold in a heartbeat. The scholarly consensus is far from settled on how widely such braziers were allowed in towers. Some historians argue that captains banned them in guard posts, fearing fire more than frost. Others insist that portable heat was essential in northern climates, with strict rules about tending flames safely. Archaeological traces, scorch marks on tower floors, bits of ash lodged in cracks suggest that, rules or no rules, soldiers often risked the glow. Picture the scene. The guard chamber is dark, save for the faint red light in the brazier's belly. Shadows crawl along the walls, thrown by the trembling coals. 4 men cluster around it, hands stretched forward, their breath catching white in the air. The brazier pops softly as a coal shifts, releasing a whiff of smoke. The warmth is small, barely enough to chase the edge off the chill, but in this place it feels like summer itself. You crouch closer, extending numb fingers until they sting with returning blood. The iron brazier radiates a harsh, metallic heat that prickles your skin. You shift your boots nearer, the leather steaming faintly where damp met fire. Around you, the chamber smells of smoke and iron, layered over the ever-present damp stone. Your ears catch the occasional hiss as a guard spits onto a glowing coal for sport, the vapor rising like a ghost in the air. Some guardrooms made use of more elaborate braziers. Wealthier castles issued pans with perforated lids, designed to contain sparks and reduce danger. Others simply relied on whatever vessel was at hand. An old cooking pot, a broken shield hammered into a bowl, even a flat slab of stone on which embers were spread. Innovation was born of necessity, not comfort. Yet the fire was always double-edged. Men spoke of companions who succumbed not to frost, but to smoke inhalation, especially when chambers were shut tight against wind. Too little draught, and the brazier suffocated everyone in sleep. Too much, and the coals burned out too quickly. The balance was delicate, a gamble taken each night. Still, imagine how that glow must have felt in the bleak midwinter. A brazier not only gave heat, it gave light. In an age where darkness pressed in with almost physical weight, the sight of red coals glowing in the corner offered a psychological anchor. Guards could doze with eyes half open, reassured by the steady pulse of fire. Without it, the blackness of a stone tower was absolute, a void that chilled both body and mind. There's an odd superstition recorded in a few sources. Some soldiers believed that if a coal jumped from the brazier and landed near you while you slept, it foretold an enemy attack before dawn. Was this pure coincidence, or a way of giving meaning to the random danger of sparks? Either way, you can picture guards muttering prayers over the embers, half fearing the glow as much as they cherished it. The sensory impression lingers. Your hands hover above the coals, palms tingling, face warmed on one side while the other remains cold. The firelight flickers against your eyelids as you doze. Every so often, you stir to poke the embers with an iron rod, sending sparks upward like brief stars in the enclosed night. The brazier crackles faintly, and you sink deeper into its hypnotic glow. There is camaraderie here too. Around the fire, men tell stories, sing softly, or grumble about rations. The brazier becomes a hearth, a point of fellowship. Laughter rises, muffled but warm, as if the flames themselves coaxed out human voices. You tuck your cloak around your shoulders, lean nearer, and feel both body and spirit ease. And yet the danger never disappears. You think of the rushes spread on the floor, dry as tinder. You think of the wooden beams above, creaking in the draught. A stray spark, one careless boot, and the fire would devour the chamber faster than the cold ever could. It is a fragile balance, fire against frost, life against hazard. As your eyes grow heavy, you lie back on your straw pallet, the brazier still glowing in the corner. The shadows sway against the walls, breathing with the embers. The warmth reaches you in faint waves, just enough to soften the stone beneath your body. You know it will fade before morning, that you will wake to cold once again. But for now, lulled by the glow and the soft hiss of coals, you surrender to sleep, grateful for this borrowed warmth in a world built of chill stone and bitter draughts. You open your eyes to find that the brazier has burned low, little more than grey ash glowing faintly in the iron pan. The chill creeps back into the chamber, wrapping around you like an unwelcome blanket. This time, though, your thoughts turn toward the fixed hearths carved into the stone itself, those recessed fireplaces built into castle walls. Medieval builders knew the cold was a constant enemy, so they attempted, however imperfectly, to fight it with permanent fire. Surviving records show that great halls almost always had vast hearths, sometimes big enough to roast an ox, while smaller chambers, including some guardrooms, had narrow wall niches where smoke curled up through chimneys. A firmly established fact is that these hearths changed the way men experienced winter inside castles. Instead of gathering around a small, dangerous brazier, guards could bask in the wider heat of a real fireplace, where flames leapt high and cast light across the chamber. The hearth also doubled as a cook spot, its embers roasting meat or heating spiced wine. For a sentry returning from a shift on the battlements, the sight of a glowing hearth meant more than warmth. It meant food, light, and the promise of comfort. But there's something rather unexpected when you picture how these hearths actually performed. Unlike modern fireplaces, many medieval versions had no real chimneys. Instead, smoke drifted upward through a hole in the roof or out a small vent. That meant guardrooms could quickly fill with haze, leaving men blinking, coughing, eyes watering even as their hands thawed. Imagine settling down to sleep near the fire, comforted by the heat, but waking with your throat raw and lungs heavy from smoke. It was the trade-off of survival, warmth at the cost of breath. Specialists remain divided about how effective these hearths were in the higher towers. Some argue that flues were carefully built into the masonry, venting smoke efficiently. Others claim the systems were crude, leading to constant smoky interiors. The truth may be that both existed side by side, depending on the wealth of the castle and the skill of its masons. A royal garrison might enjoy relatively clean warmth, while a poor keep's guards choked on their fires. Picture the sensory detail of one such chamber. A small fireplace is carved into the wall, glowing red as logs crackle and spit. Sparks leap upward, chasing shadows across the vaulted ceiling. The air smells of pine, resin and wood smoke, mingled with damp stone. A guard stretches out his hands, sighing as the heat penetrates numb fingers. Another sits back, letting the warmth wash over his face, while the rest of his body still tingles with cold. Cloaks hang near the fire to dry, dripping faintly onto the hearthstones, hissing when drops touch the embers. You lie near the hearth yourself, eyes half closed. The fire's glow flickers behind your lids, an orange dance that lulls you. Every snap of the logs becomes a rhythm, steady as a heartbeat. You hear the gentle whoosh as a new draft pulls smoke up the vent, followed by the faint whistle of wind outside. The warmth is uneven, your face hot, your feet still icy, but the contrast itself makes you drowsy. These hearths had their peculiarities. Some were positioned deliberately near arrow slits, so that smoke could find an easier exit. Others were tucked deep into corners, leaving much of the chamber unheated. Guards learned where to sleep. The closer, the warmer, but also the smokier. Too far, and the cold crept back in. It was a nightly negotiation, a dance of proximity to flame. The fireplace was more than practical, though. It was symbolic. Fire represented civilization against chaos, order against the dark. In a castle tower, the hearth reminded guards that they were not merely freezing animals, but men bound together in service, watching over their lord's domain. Around that glow, songs might be sung softly, prayers whispered, dice thrown onto the hearthstones. The fireplace transformed the chill prison of stone into something just faintly resembling home. Still, not every guard could enjoy it. Many posts were too exposed for hearths. Soldiers on wall walks or gate towers returned only after their shifts, often to embers already dying. In those cases, the fire's glow became a fleeting luxury, something you caught only for a moment before collapsing into straw and cloak. One curious detail comes from accounts of castles in particularly cold regions, where entire chimneys were stuffed with straw to keep drafts from reversing down the flues. Guards would then burn smaller fires in wall niches, carefully rationing fuel. It shows just how desperate men were to keep warm in a world where stone itself seemed determined to freeze them. As you close your eyes again, you feel the hearth's heat on your cheeks. The fire pops, sending a spark skittering across the floor. A comrade stomps it out quickly, muttering about how easily the rushes might catch, but the warmth remains, steady, like a second heartbeat in the chamber. The smoke swirls, acrid and heavy, but you breathe it in anyway, letting it numb your senses. For tonight, the fireplace has kept death at bay. You tuck yourself tighter into your cloak, letting the stone wall press against your back, feeling the fire's glow seep into you. Sleep steals over you slowly, the warmth balancing just enough against the cold. Beyond the walls, the wind still howls, but here, in the circle of firelight, you dream of summer fields, the crackle of logs merging with the rustle of wheat. The fire in the wall niche fades once more, and the stone chamber grows colder with every breath. Your thoughts wander toward another method men use to trap warmth, not through flames, but through fabric. When you look around, you notice cloth hangings, patched and heavy, draped from the beams and stretched across corners. These makeshift curtains are more than decoration. They are barriers against the drafts that slip in through every slit, crack and doorway. Medieval sources often describe how both nobles and soldiers hung cloth around their sleeping areas. In a grand hall, these became rich tapestries of silk or wool. In a guard room, they were more likely to be coarse blankets nailed at the corners. Yet the purpose was the same, to create a pocket of warmer air inside the endless chill of stone. One well-attested practice was the use of bed curtains. Even in humble settings, beds were sometimes enclosed with thick hangings that reached to the floor. These trapped the heat of bodies and breath, creating a microclimate within. Imagine 4 soldiers sharing a corner bedstead, their cloaks pulled tight, the bed curtains closed around them. Outside, frost coats the walls, but inside the little tent, air grows noticeably warmer, though thick with the smell of sweat and wool. The arrangement gave privacy too, but for guards, warmth was its primary gift. There's something rather unusual that records hint at. Men occasionally strung cloaks or spare garments across ropes to mimic curtains when none were provided. A guard could hammer 2 nails into the wall, knot a rope between them, and drape whatever cloth he had. It wasn't elegant, but it broke the draft. You can picture such ingenuity boots drying near the hearth, cloaks stretched out overhead, and men curling beneath the makeshift canopy, as if inside a tent pitched within the tower. Debate still lingers among historians about how widespread these improvisations were in military settings. Some scholars argue that cloth hangings were expensive, rarely wasted on guards. Others point to archaeological finds of nail holes in tower walls, suggesting that fabrics were indeed suspended, perhaps in humble versions for soldiers. It may be that common guards used rough hemp or wool, while wealthier households enjoyed bright woven scenes depicting hunts or saints. Close your eyes now, and imagine yourself inside such an enclosure. The curtain droops overhead, faintly damp, smelling of smoke and grease from months of use. But as you breathe beneath it, you notice the difference. Your own exhaled warmth lingers, no longer stolen by drafts. The air feels thicker, heavier, but safer. Outside, you hear the hiss of wind through arrow slits. Inside, only the muffled sound reaches you, soft as a lullaby. The sensory world here is intimate. Your hand brushes the fabric, rough beneath your fingertips. The curtain sways gently as another guard shifts beside you, stirring the enclosed air. You listen to his breathing, steady and close, and feel a small comfort that both of you are hidden together from the night. The curtain is no fortress, but it is a cocoon. Some castles went further. Wealthier garrisons built wooden screens around sleeping alcoves, which guards hung with cloth to make miniature chambers. These cubicles gave each man or pair of men a sense of enclosure. Picture a row of such spaces along a tower wall, each glowing faintly with candlelight, curtains pulled shut, like little lanterns in the dark. The effect was almost homelike, though the draft still slipped beneath the screens, reminding men that stone could never be fully tamed. And there were practical concerns too. Cloth hangings collected soot and grease, becoming heavy with grime. They needed beating out, just like rugs or bedding. Left unattended, they stank and even grew mouldy in damp towers. Yet guards accepted this, because even a smelly curtain was better than bare stone. An odd superstition clings to these hangings in some accounts. It was said that spirits of the cold, imagined as thin, sneaky demons, could not pass through wool. Whether born of faith or desperation, guards sometimes muttered charms as they pulled curtains shut, convinced that they had barred not only the wind, but the night's evil. The psychological impact was real. When you lie beneath a canopy or behind a curtain, the sense of enclosure calms you. The vast, echoing chamber shrinks into a small, private den. Shadows grow less menacing. Drafts become muffled sighs instead of stinging gales. You sleep more easily, convinced that you are protected, even if only by a thin sheet of cloth. So you settle into your straw, the curtain swaying faintly above you, You tug it lower, shutting out the draft that rattles against the tower's arrow slit. The chamber darkens into a pocket of warmth, shared with your comrades. Outside, the wind still prowls, but here, behind your makeshift wall of fabric, you slip into drowsiness. The stone still presses its cold into the room, but you, wrapped in wool and hidden beneath a curtain, manage to outwit it if only until dawn. The curtain sways in the draught, and your mind drifts to another remedy, one that warms from the inside rather than the outside. Guards in medieval castles, much like peasants in villages or nobles in their halls, believed deeply in the power of drink to chase away the chill. Tankards of ale, mugs of mead, or, on fortunate nights, mulled wine infused with spices became their inner hearth. Contemporary accounts remind us that fermented drink was safer than water and more available than milk. But in the icy depths of a guard's night, the most important thing was simple. Alcohol promised warmth. A widely recognized truth is that beer and ale were staples of the medieval diet. Even low-ranking sentries received daily rations, not as luxury but as necessity. Liquid calories gave energy, and the mild alcohol dulled aches and eased the sting of cold. You can picture a guard finishing his watch, gulping down a cup of thick, cloudy ale, then curling up on his straw pallet, warmth blooming in his chest as if he'd swallowed a small fire. Something rather unexpected surfaces in a few chronicles. Guards sometimes heated their drinks. Hot ale or warmed mead, thickened with honey, was believed to help men sleep soundly in cold chambers. Spices like cinnamon or cloves, expensive imports, were rare, but when available, they transformed the drink into both medicine and indulgence. Imagine cupping a steaming mug, the sweet aroma rising into your nose, while frost creeps along the walls behind you. It is comfort in liquid form, the closest thing to central heating a medieval soldier could hope for. Yet debate lingers in academic circles over how effective this practice truly was against the cold. Modern science tells us that alcohol causes blood to rush to the skin, giving a sensation of heat but actually cooling the body faster. Did medieval guards unwittingly worsen their risk of hypothermia? Or did the caloric load of beer and mead dense with malt and honey counteract the danger? The evidence is mixed, leaving room for speculation. Picture the sensory experience. You raise the wooden cup to your lips, its rim rough and slightly splintered. The ale inside is thick, almost chewy, with a yeasty tang. It is not crisp like modern beer, but earthy, heavy, faintly sour. You gulp it down, wiping froth from your beard, and already you feel the illusion of warmth spreading through your chest. A comrade passes you, a jug of mead, golden and sticky, its sweetness clinging to your tongue. The warmth deepens, your head grows light, and the cold seems to retreat, if only in your imagination. The social effect mattered just as much. Around the brazier or near the hearth, guards shared drinks, lifting cups in weary toasts. A jug of ale circulated, laughter rising, complaints softening. For a few moments, comradeship replaced misery. The sound of mugs clinking echoed faintly against stone, a tiny rebellion against the silence of the night. One curious anecdote appears in a 14th century garrison roll. A commander scolded his men for diluting ale with hot stones to cheat the ration. They would drop heated rocks into their jugs, making the drink froth and expand, as if doubling its volume. The practice left the ale tasting scorched, but in desperate winters, soldiers preferred bad beer to none at all. There was also a ritual quality to drink. Guards sometimes swore oaths over shared cups, binding themselves to stay awake, or to wake one another if sleep crept too deeply. The drink was not only fuel but glue, holding men together in their cold vigil. Without it, the night stretched endlessly, a black wall pressing in. With it, the darkness softened into something bearable, even humorous. Still, drink was double-edged. Too much ale dulled the senses, and records contain more than one tale of a drunken guard sleeping through an alarm. Punishments were harsh. because one man's stupor could endanger an entire fortress. Yet the practice endured, because commanders knew denying alcohol outright would mean mutiny or worse, despair. Imagine the chamber now. A brazier glows faintly in the corner. Curtains sway against drafts. Straw crackles beneath you, but in your hands rests a wooden mug half full of warm mead. The sweetness lingers on your tongue. Your cheeks glow with false heat, and for the first time tonight, you smile. The fire may fade, the curtain may flutter, but inside your chest a small warmth remains. As your eyelids droop, you set the mug aside and curl deeper into your cloak. Your breath tastes faintly of honey. Your ears hum with the comfort of shared laughter fading into snores. The cold is still there, waiting, but dulled for now. And in that hazy space between waking and sleeping, you understand why generations of guards swore that ale, mead and wine were their best allies against the endless chill of castle nights. The sweetness of mead still lingers faintly on your tongue as your stomach rumbles, reminding you that warmth doesn't only come from cloaks, fires or drink. It also comes from food thick, heavy meals that fill the belly and stoke the body's furnace through the long night. In the medieval world, soldiers knew instinctively what modern science confirms. Eat heartily, and your body fights the cold more effectively. Chroniclers frequently note that guards were supplied with bread, cheese, salted meats, and sometimes porridge, rations designed to provide energy rather than luxury. One well-documented detail is that guards on winter watch often ate before sleep specifically to ward off the chill. A slice of dark rye bread, thick with coarse grains, paired with a lump of salty pork fat, might not sound inviting to you now. But to a weary sentry, those calories meant survival. The fat was fuel, burning slowly within, creating a steady warmth that no cloak could provide. A soldier who went to bed hungry was a soldier who woke colder, weaker, and more likely to stumble on his next shift. Something oddly charming emerges from scattered records. Guards sometimes saved scraps of food not for themselves, but to tuck into their bedding as a midnight snack. Imagine rolling over in the drafty chamber, fishing in your pouch for a piece of hard cheese, and chewing slowly in the dark while your comrades snore. The act was less about hunger than reassurance, a reminder that the world still held comfort even in the stone's bitter chill. It is the medieval equivalent of sneaking a cookie under the covers. Specialists still debate the exact makeup of a guard's winter diet. Some argue that rations were monotonous, heavy on grains and salted fish, leaving little variety. Others point to accounts of wealthier castles supplying beef, venison, or even imported almonds and figs during feasts, suggesting that guards occasionally tasted true luxury. The reality likely shifted with rank, wealth, and circumstance. During sieges, even the finest garrisons shrank their diets to mouldy bread and thin gruel. But in better times, fatty meals before sleep were standard practice. Picture the sensory details of one such night. A kettle hangs over the hearth, bubbling with barley porridge stirred with a wooden spoon. The air smells of grain, earthy and warm, laced with the sharper tang of onions thrown in for flavour. A guard ladles a steaming bowl, sits cross-legged on the straw, and gulps it down, the heat radiating from his chest outward. Another gnaws on a strip of salted beef, leathery but rich, savouring the salt that clings to his lips. The crackle of the hearth mixes with the crunch of crusty bread, and for a while the chamber feels less like a prison of stone and more like a kitchen hearth. It is not only the calories, but the ritual that matters. Eating before sleep reassures you that you are cared for, that supplies remain, that hunger will not join cold as a companion. Guards who shared food built bonds as strong as those forged in battle. A piece of cheese passed hand to hand in the dim firelight carried more meaning than its size suggested. Of course, meals carried hazards too. Too much fat before lying down could cause indigestion, leading to restless nights and dreams thick with discomfort. Guards joked about nightmares from bacon, though in truth their bodies simply struggled with heavy food consumed at odd hours. Yet even knowing this, few refused the comfort. Better to sleep queasy and warm than to shiver in emptiness. There are small curiosities too. In some castles, guards ate chestnuts roasted in the embers, their shells popping and cracking as heat split them open. The smell of roasting nuts must have filled the guardroom with an almost festive air, a moment of simple joy in an otherwise harsh routine. Elsewhere, onions were prized for their supposed power to strengthen the blood against cold. A soldier crunching into a raw onion in the dead of night might have believed it was as protective as a cloak. Debate lingers among historians about whether guards regularly received hot meals at night or relied on cold rations left over from the day. Some argue that kitchens closed after supper, leaving guards to gnaw on hardened bread. Others suggest that small hearths in towers allowed simple cooking soups, porridges, and roasted scraps prepared by the soldiers themselves. The lack of detailed records means we can only imagine, guided by traces of food remains found in archaeological digs. Now close your eyes and place yourself in that guard chamber after supper. The brazier still glows, the curtains sway gently against draughts, and the smell of barley porridge clings to the air. Your belly is full, pleasantly heavy, and warmth radiates from within. You lie back on the straw, cloak wrapped tightly, listening to the slow breaths of comrades equally sated. For a time the cold feels distant, pushed back by the furnace of your own digestion. The sensory impression lingers as you drift towards sleep. The taste of salt still tingles on your lips, the smell of onion hovers in your beard, and the faint crackle of wood from the hearth punctuates the silence. You shift, content, pulling your cloak tighter and tucking your feet close. Your body is heavy with food, your mind soft with fatigue. The stone may still press its cold into the chamber, but your belly answers with fire. You think of the rhythm of such nights, eat, laugh, lie down, and trust that the warmth will last until dawn. Perhaps you dream of feasts in noble halls with platters of meat and spiced wine. Perhaps you only dream of another bowl of porridge. Either way, the memory of warmth follows you into slumber, proving that sometimes the simplest defense against the coldest stone is nothing more than a full stomach and a quiet moment shared among tired men. Your belly full and heavy, you drift into a haze, but the toll of the watch bell cuts through your drowsiness like a blade. The night is divided not into one long stretch of rest, but into rotations, short, punctuated intervals of wakefulness and uneasy sleep. This system of shifts, so central to guard life, shaped how men endured the cold. Evidence from castle regulations and military ordinances makes it clear. Few guards were expected to stand in the freezing dark from dusk until dawn without relief. Instead, watch duty was broken into segments, each man taking his turn while others sought warmth and rest. One firmly established detail from garrison rolls is that castles often divided the night into 3 or 4 watches. In winter, those watches grew shorter, not out of kindness but necessity. A soldier forced to stand still in the cold for more than 2 hours risked stiff joints, numb fingers, and dulled senses. A sentry who froze became a liability, no better than a sleeping man. So, the rotation itself was a weapon against the cold, an acknowledgement that human endurance had limits even within fortress walls. And there's an unexpected curiosity. Some castles used bells or horns to signal the changing of the watch, not only to wake the next group, but also to reassure the entire garrison that order was kept. Imagine lying half asleep in your straw bed, hearing the faint bray of a horn from the battlements, and knowing another man has taken your place. That sound is comfort itself, a promise that for the next stretch of hours you may close your eyes without guilt. Debate lingers among historians about how strictly these rotations were enforced. Some argue that discipline was tight, with captains inspecting posts to catch sleepers. Others suggest that, especially in smaller castles, watch changes were looser, dictated more by common sense and mutual agreement among soldiers. The truth probably varied. In times of siege or heightened threat, watches grew stricter. In quieter periods, men negotiated their own rhythms of wakefulness and rest. Picture the scene inside the guard chamber. Two men rise reluctantly, tugging cloaks over shoulders and stamping feet to chase away sleep. Their comrades groan, curl tighter under blankets, and relish the reprieve. The fresh watch trudge toward the stairwell, boots clanging softly against stone, their breath already frosting in the cold air. Those left behind shuffle closer to the brazier, lay heads on folded arms, and let exhaustion claim them. The room sighs with shifting bodies, the rustle of straw, the low murmur of dreams. The sensory impression of these rotations is unique. You are never entirely asleep, never entirely awake. The toll of bells, the scrape of boots, the mutter of voices intrude constantly. Your rest is fractured, shallow, but frequent enough to keep you alive. Each time you lie down, you know it will not be for long. You curl tighter, breathing against your hands, chasing warmth in snatched fragments of sleep. There is camaraderie in the system too. Men relieved from watch often warmed themselves quickly, then nudged sleeping comrades awake to take their turn. Complaints were muttered, curses exchanged, but the cycle held. Each man knew that his relief would come in turn. That fairness depended on shared burden. Without such discipline, resentment festered. With it, a rhythm formed, harsh but dependable. One odd anecdote survives from a Burgundian garrison. Guards were required to sing or whistle softly as they approached sleeping comrades to rouse them. The sound was meant to prevent sudden panic in the dark, ensuring that a woken man recognized friend from foe. Imagine being stirred by a tuneless whistle, groaning awake, and fumbling for your cloak while others drift back to sleep. It is a strange intimacy, this constant trade of wakefulness and slumber. The system carried dangers, of course. A man pulled too often from sleep might stumble through his shift half awake, vulnerable to both cold and carelessness. Others, left too long in rest, might oversleep, missing their turn entirely. Punishments ranged from fines to lashings, but the deeper punishment was the anger of one's comrades, forced to endure longer in the cold because of another's laziness. Now close your eyes and imagine yourself within that rhythm. You lie on your straw pallet, cloak pulled to your chin. The bell tolls softly, echoing through stone corridors. Somewhere above, a horn sounds. Two men rise, and you hear their boots fade into the stairwell. You shift in your bedding, sigh in relief, and let yourself sink deeper into warmth. But even in sleep, your mind braces for the next toll, the next nudge, the next moment when your turn will come. This rhythm defines your night. It is not comfort, not true rest, but a compromise between vigilance and survival. You sleep in fragments, dream in fragments, live in fragments, and yet, those fragments add up to enough. Enough to keep you alive, enough to keep the castle safe, enough to carry you through another frozen night on the wall. The horn fades into silence, and your mind begins to wander toward the architecture of the castle itself, toward the odd, hidden places where guards sometimes sought extra warmth. One of the cleverest, though rarely admitted aloud, was to sleep above the stables. Horses, oxen, and even pigs generated heat in staggering amounts, and their body warmth rose through the floors, seeping into chambers perched above. Records from household accounts and castle surveys confirm that garrison rooms were sometimes deliberately positioned above or beside animal stalls, not only for convenience, but also for the subtle benefit of that living heat. A well-attested fact is that medieval builders understood the usefulness of animal warmth. In monasteries too, novices sometimes slept in chambers over byres, where the animals below gave off a steady fug of heat through cracks in the floorboards. Guards were no different. A sentry who trudged down from a freezing wall walk into a chamber above a stable, felt, by comparison, as though he had stepped into a bathhouse. It was still cold, yes, but no longer deathly so. The warmth of beasts kept frost from settling on bedding, and their sounds provided a strange sort of lullaby. Something rather peculiar emerges when you imagine it. The mingling of scents. Warm air rising from the stable carried with it the smell of hay, dung, and animal musk. To you now, it may sound unpleasant, but to a weary guard, it was reassurance. That smell meant warmth, meant life pulsing just beneath the floorboards. You could drift to sleep with the muffled snorts of horses below, hooves shifting softly in straw, the rhythmic crunch of hay being chewed in the dark. It was less a chamber and more a living ecosystem, where man and beast shared breath and heat. Scholars continue to disagree about how common this arrangement was. Some argue it was deliberate design, noting that many castle keeps had stables on their lower levels with guardrooms directly above. Others caution that not every fortress allowed such proximity, especially in wealthier or more formal settings where odours were frowned upon. The truth may rest somewhere in the middle. Poorer castles leaned on animal heat as necessity, while wealthier lords could afford separate quarters for men and beasts. Imagine the sensory scene. You lie on your straw mattress, but beneath the boards you hear horses shifting, the soft rustle of their tails swatting flies even in the cold, the occasional snort breaking the silence. The air in your chamber is warmer than in the tower above, carrying the faint sweetness of hay mixed with acrid manure. Your nose wrinkles at first, but then relaxes. The smell is part of the rhythm of life here. Your body loosens in the warmer air, your breath no longer steaming quite so fiercely in the dark. There was an odd superstition tied to this closeness. Some guards believed that sleeping above animals granted protection against nightmares, the beasts absorbing evil spirits through their bodies. Others thought the opposite, that animal spirits might creep upward, riding the warmth into human dreams. Whether you laughed or shuddered, the belief coloured how men spoke of their quarters. A snort in the night might be taken as a warning from some invisible realm. But beyond superstition, the practical warmth was undeniable. Guards sometimes spread their bedding directly on stable lofts, where hay piles served as insulation. These haylofts smelled strongly of grass, and the warmth below kept frost from forming. Sleeping there blurred the line between soldier and farmhand, yet survival blurred many lines in medieval life. The social side mattered too. Sleeping above animals often meant closer proximity among guards, as these were small chambers crowded with men. Bodies pressed shoulder to shoulder, listening to the animals beneath, formed a strange community, men and beasts together resisting the cold. Laughter sometimes echoed in these rooms, jokes about sharing fleas with the horses, about being half a stable boy. But the laughter hid gratitude. Better the company of horses than the company of frost. Now picture yourself in such a chamber. You curl under your cloak, the warmth rising gently from beneath. The straw beneath you feels softer, less brittle, warmed by the fug of animals. Your ears catch the rhythmic breathing of horses, steady and soothing. The faint crackle of bedding straw below blends with the rustle of your own palate. The air is heavy, humid compared to the icy corridors, but you accept it gladly. You close your eyes, inhaling hay and musk. The warmth creeps into your bones, loosening the stiffness from your joints. Outside, the wind still lashes against stone, rattling shutters, whistling through arrow slits. But here, you are cocooned in a pocket of warmth, created not by fire or fabric, but by the steady life of beasts below. The castle itself feels less hostile, more alive, as if its stones breathe along with horse and man. For tonight, you are grateful for the stables, grateful for the warmth, however pungent, grateful for the snorts and stamps that remind you the night is shared. You drift slowly into sleep, lulled not by silence but by the living heartbeat of the animals that keep your chamber just warm enough to hold death at bay. The warmth of the stables fades as the bell tolls again, and you tug your cloak tighter while thinking of the small defences every guard carried on his body. If cloaks and furs were the broad shields against cold, then socks, hoods, and mittens were the daggers, small but vital weapons in the endless battle with frost. Surviving inventories from castles mention these garments repeatedly. Woolen hose issued to soldiers, linen coifs tied beneath helmets, mittens of leather or knitted wool. They may sound like trivial details, but in truth, They made the difference between sleep and a night of shivering misery. One established reality is that wool socks, though simple, were among the most valued items in a guard's kit. Unlike modern woven socks, they were often stitched from pieces of cloth or fashioned as long hose that reached up the leg. Some extended to the thigh, secured with garters, wrapping the guard in a sheath of warmth. Soldiers prized them so much that repairs were constant. Patches of cloth stitched over holes, darning done with coarse thread, anything to prevent the icy bite of stone floors from reaching skin. A guard who lost his hose in winter was half defeated before the watch even began. There's something unexpectedly charming in the records. Mittens were sometimes made with a single compartment for 4 fingers and one for the thumb, like the mittens you might remember from childhood. They trapped warmth more effectively than gloves, with separate fingers. Men joked that mittens made them clumsy, but they also let them curl hands inside for extra heat. Some even slipped bits of fur inside for added insulation, creating a crude but effective lining. Imagine lying down after watch, mittens still on, hands curled against your chest, warmth clinging like a memory of the fire. Scholars remain divided about how common knitted items were during this period. Some argue that knitting spread widely by the late Middle Ages, making knitted socks and mittens available even to common soldiers. Others maintain that most were sewn from woven fabric, knitting being too new and costly for mass use. The truth may be a patchwork. Wealthier castles issued knitted garments, while poorer ones relied on simple stitched cloth. Picture the sensory experience of these small comforts. You peel off your boots after a freezing watch and flex your toes inside woolen socks, damp but still clinging with warmth. The wool scratches slightly, lanolin still lingering from the sheep, but you smile at the relief. You tug your hood lower over your face, a woolen coif lined with rough linen, and feel your breath warm the fabric until it grows humid against your skin. The mittens are stiff from use, but when you press them to your cheeks, they radiate the faint smell of smoke and leather, grounding you in the shared world of the guardroom. These garments shaped how you slept. Men often wore their socks, hoods, and mittens to bed, knowing that removing them meant waking numb. A hood pulled over the face acted as a mask, holding in breath. Mittens tucked under arms kept fingers from stiffening. Even socks, damp from patrol, were preferable to bare feet on straw. The layering was imperfect but essential. One curious tidbit from German sources describes guards stuffing their socks with rabbit fur or dry moss for added warmth. It was an improvised insulation, softer than plain wool and surprisingly effective. Another account mentions soldiers wrapping cloth around their heads until they resembled mummies, muttering jokes about looking like corpses before sleep. Humor helped, even when the cold pressed hardest. The small garments carried symbolic weight too. A hood was not merely cloth, it was identity. Knights wore richly lined hoods trimmed with fur, while common guards had plain wool. The difference marked rank, but in the dark of the guardroom, everyone tugged hoods low against the draft, leveling them in their shared battle with cold. Now imagine the chamber again. Men curl on their straw pallets, cloaks pulled high, but what keeps them truly alive are the little things. Toes snug in hose, hands cupped in mittens, faces hidden in hoods. The room is a sea of sleeping forms, only noses poking out into the cold air. From the doorway, they might look like bundles of cloth, indistinguishable. But each bundle is a man, cocooned in small garments that mean the difference between life and frostbite. The sensory rhythm continues as you tuck your own mittens beneath your chin, feel your socks scratch against straw, and draw your hood tighter. The stone still radiates chill, the wind still whispers through cracks, but the warmth of these small defenses lingers. You close your eyes, sigh into the fabric, and let the scratch of wool and the faint smell of lanolin become your lullaby. The warmth of wool still clings faintly to your skin, but another comfort curls closer in the dark, padding softly across the straw. You feel a brush of fur against your hand, hear the quiet huff of breath, and realize you are not alone. A dog shaggy, faithful, and just as cold as you has settled beside you. In the medieval castle, animals were not only guards of the walls but also companions in the guardroom. The watchdog was a sentinel by day, and at night, a furry blanket pressed against the ribs of tired men. A well-recorded reality is that dogs were common fixtures in castles, valued for their sharp senses. Chroniclers describe mastiffs chained at gates, hounds roaming courtyards, and smaller breeds kept close for hunting or companionship. These animals were essential to defense, often alerting guards to intruders before human ears caught a sound. Yet the same animals, once off duty, became part of the nightly struggle against cold. A dog curled at your side was warmth and alarm combined, guardian and bedfellow in one. There's something rather delightful in the details. Some accounts note that dogs chose their favorite guards and would refuse to sleep anywhere else. Imagine a tired soldier returning from patrol, only to find his hound already sprawled across his pallet, tail thumping, eyes expectant. The man would grumble, shove over, and make room. The warmth that followed erased any annoyance. It is a picture as human as any gruff warriors soothed by the loyalty of their animals. Specialists remain divided about just how widespread this practice was. Some argue that in wealthy castles, dogs were kept separate, housed in kennels or with huntsmen. Others suggest that in more practical garrisons, dogs roamed freely, part of the nightly life of guards. Archaeological digs lend weight to both. Bones of large hounds found in castle yards, but also claw scratches near living quarters that hint at their presence indoors. Picture the sensory moment. The dog presses against you, body radiating steady heat, fur coarse beneath your fingers. Its breath is warm on your wrist, carrying the faint smell of meat scraps from supper. You shift, and it shifts too, pressing closer, its tail thudding softly against straw. Around the chamber, other dogs nestle against other men, a patchwork of warmth scattered among the pallets. The room smells of fur and smoke, of leather and hay, an animal fug mingling with human sweat. The companionship mattered as much as the heat. A guard who shared his bed with a dog slept more soundly, not only for warmth but for safety. If footsteps echoed in the corridor, the animal stirred first, growling low, ears pricked. A man could bury his face in his cloak, knowing his canine companion would not let him be surprised in slumber. That reassurance was priceless in a world where danger often came by stealth. One quirky tidbit survives in a ballad that describes a dog lying across a knight's feet to guard both warmth and honor. It is part poetry, part practicality. Feet were most vulnerable to frostbite, and a heavy hound sprawled over them was as effective as any woolen sock. Imagine the relief of cold-numbed toes slowly thawing beneath the weight of a loyal beast. There was superstition, too. Some men believed dogs could sense spirits, their growls warning of ghosts as much as intruders. A guard who woke to his dog barking at shadows might mutter a prayer, convinced that the animal had driven away something unholy. Whether truth or imagination, the belief added another layer of comfort. Your companion protected you from threats seen and unseen. Of course, sharing sleep with animals had drawbacks. Fleas, ticks, and the occasional stench of wet fur were constant irritants. A guard might wake scratching at bites or grumbling about the smell after the dog rolled in muck. Yet even with these inconveniences, most accepted the trade. Better a few fleas than a frozen night alone. Now imagine yourself fully in that moment. You lie on your pallet, cloak pulled high, straw rustling beneath. At your side, the dog breathes steadily, chest rising and falling in rhythm with yours. Its warmth seeps into you, slow and sure. Outside, the wind moans through arrow slits, but inside the dog shifts, sighs, and settles heavier against your ribs. You scratch behind its ear, feel the soft twitch of muscle, and smile in the dark. You close your eyes, lulled by the dual comfort of warmth and vigilance. The dog will hear the dangers you cannot, will keep watch even in your sleep. And in return, you share your pallet, your cloak, your breath. Together you outwit the cold stone and the prowling night, proving that sometimes the simplest companions, four-legged and faithful, are the surest defense against freezing to death in a medieval castle. The steady warmth of the dog curled at your side fades as the night wears on, and your thoughts turn toward the seasons themselves. Life inside a castle was not frozen in perpetual winter. The rhythms of warmth and cold rose and fell with the year. Guards adapted constantly, altering how they slept, what they wore, and even how they ate depending on the calendar. The contrast between winter and summer routines shaped nearly every detail of guard life, from the thickness of bedding to the length of night watches. It is well established that in winter, survival dominated every thought. Extra layers of wool, cloaks doubled up, braziers hauled into chambers, and bedding stuffed thick with straw were essential just to stave off frostbite. Men slept in communal heaps, dogs pressed at their sides, food heavy with fat and salt to keep the furnace of the body burning through the dark hours. The nights were longer too, stretching like black oceans, demanding more rotations of watch and more discipline to keep men awake and moving. But when summer came, the pattern shifted completely. Guards shed layers, sleeping sometimes in nothing but a tunic or shirt, cloaks cast aside in heaps. Braziers were unnecessary, hearths burned low, and curtains were drawn not to block cold drafts, but to mute the buzzing of flies. Imagine lying in the same guardroom where frost once formed on walls, now restless from stifling heat trapped in stone. You kick at your straw bedding, too warm even for comfort, and long for the sharp bite of winter air. An unexpected detail emerges from records. In summer, guards often dragged their bedding outside onto battlements or into courtyards, choosing cool night breezes over stuffy chambers. Picture rows of soldiers stretched along a parapet, cloaks spread beneath them, stars overhead. The stone beneath was still hard, but the open air gave relief. Of course, it carried risks, rain, dew, or the surprise of an enemy arrow, but many preferred it to suffocating indoors. Scholars remain divided about whether summer or winter was harder for guards. Some argue that winter's bitter cold was the greater danger, draining strength and threatening life. Others point to summer fatigue, when short nights meant fewer hours of rest, and swarms of insects kept men tossing on their pallets. Both extremes gnawed at health in different ways, and neither season offered true ease. Imagine the sensory difference. In winter, you wake to the crunch of frost underfoot, your breath misting white, your cloak stiff with cold. In summer, you wake sticky with sweat, the straw beneath you damp from humidity, the air heavy with the smell of bodies crammed too close together. You swat at a mosquito whining near your ear and roll away from the heat of another man's shoulder, only to find no comfort. The struggle changes form but never disappears. Rations shifted with the seasons as well. In winter, diets were heavy on salted meats, grains, and whatever could be stored. In summer, fresh vegetables and fruits from castle gardens appeared, lighter meals that did little to ward off nighttime chill, but eased digestion in the heat. A bowl of cold peas eaten before sleep felt very different from a steaming pot of porridge shared in January. The rituals of bedding also changed. In winter, straw was piled thick to insulate against stone, furs and cloaks layered overhead. In summer, bedding was thinned deliberately, sometimes replaced entirely with woven mats of reeds or rushes that breathe better in the heat. Guards complained about insects hiding in these mats, but they were cooler than wool. You can imagine yourself stretching out on such a mat, the reeds crackling beneath, the night breeze slipping across your face. There is even a curious tidbit. Some sources mention guards sleeping with wet cloths over their heads in summer, a primitive form of cooling. The cloth evaporated slowly in the night air, providing relief, though at the risk of waking sick with a chill. The same men who cursed freezing drafts in winter prayed for them in summer. Superstition coloured the seasons too. Winter nights were thought to harbour more spirits, the long, dark, inviting demons and ghosts. Guards muttered prayers against frost and phantoms alike. In summer, the fear shifted toward disease. Miasmas, the bad air rising from warm marshes, thought to creep into bodies while men slept. Sleeping outdoors on ramparts, though cooling, was whispered to invite fevers. Close your eyes now and imagine the cycle. Winter, stone icy, cloaks piled, bodies pressed close, fire crackling faintly. Summer stone warm to the touch, cloaks abandoned, men sprawling in open air, flies buzzing lazily in shafts of moonlight. The seasons roll one into the next, and guards must adapt again and again, never truly comfortable, always chasing survival in a world where weather itself was another adversary. Tonight, though, you feel winter still. Your cloak is tight, the dog pressed against your side, the Braziers' glow fading. Yet you know that months from now, the same chamber will be stifling, and you will yearn for cold that now feels merciless. That rhythm, harsh and unrelenting, is the heartbeat of guard life in a medieval castle. The rhythm of the seasons lingers in your thoughts, but now your mind drifts outward beyond the castle walls, toward the lives of peasants huddled in their huts. Comparing their nights with the frozen vigils of guards shows you just how different, and yet how similar, survival could be. The contrast between rural cottages and noble fortresses is striking. One was humble but warm, the other grand but cold. Guards often envied the peasants' smoky little homes, where heat clung to mud walls more faithfully than to thick stone towers. It is a firmly observed truth that medieval peasants slept close to their hearths. Their houses were single-room structures, with a central fire pit and smoke escaping through a hole in the roof. Unlike castles, whose tall walls and vast chambers trapped damp cold, cottages held warmth more efficiently, even if the air grew smoky and acrid. Families slept together in heaps of blankets, furs, and straw, with animals often brought inside to add warmth. For all their poverty, peasants rarely endured the kind of bone-deep chill that haunted castle guardrooms. Something rather curious emerges from accounts. Peasants often used their own body heat more deliberately than guards did. They piled children in the center of the bed, parents flanking them on either side, ensuring the smallest stayed warmest. Sometimes a piglet or goat kid was brought beneath the blanket as well, not for affection but for warmth. Imagine the snorts and rustles in the darkness, a living, breathing quilt of family and beast, far more intimate than the stiff formality of castle life. Specialists remain divided on which was truly harsher, peasant huts or castle chambers. Some argue peasants endured constant smoke inhalation, damp floors, and lice, making their lives no warmer in the long run. Others counter that the sheer scale of castles, with their soaring ceilings and drafty corridors, left guards at greater risk of frostbite. The debate continues, for both environments were unforgiving, though in very different ways. Picture the sensory difference. In a hut, you hear the constant crackle of a central fire, the cough of family members, the shuffling of animals penned against the wall. The air is thick, heavy with smoke and the smell of dung, but also warm, clinging to your skin like a blanket. In the castle, you hear the whistle of wind through arrow slits, the faint hiss of frost, the restless stirrings of guards muttering in their sleep. The air is clearer, but it cuts through you, stealing warmth with every breath. This comparison weighed heavily on guards. Some men, raised in villages, muttered that they preferred their mothers' smoky cottages to the grand towers of lords. Others insisted that serving in castles was a step up, fleas and frost included, because at least food was steady and shelter secure. Both views contained truth. Peasants endured hunger more often, but guards endured cold more cruelly. There's an odd tidbit tucked into a 13th century account. When garrisons were dismissed in spring, some guards took bedding home to their villages, praising its thickness compared to cottage straw. Yet peasants laughed at them, saying, "What is thick without fire?" That small exchange captures the heart of the difference. Castles had gear, peasants had heat. And there were symbolic contrasts too. Straw in a hut was family bedding replaced with each season, sweetened with herbs to freshen the air. Straw in a guardroom was communal, musty, trodden flat by boots. A peasant lying down smelled lavender and thyme scattered in the rushes. A guard smelled sweat and damp wool. The materials were the same, but the atmosphere worlds apart. Now imagine yourself slipping from your castle guardroom into a peasant hut. You duck beneath the low lintel, eyes stinging from smoke. The heat strikes you at once, pressing in from the central fire. Children giggle from under a heap of blankets, their cheeks rosy in the glow. A pig shifts in the straw near the door, grunting softly. You cough, squint, and think, this is not noble, not grand, but it is warm. Then picture yourself stepping back into the castle. Soaring ceilings, banners fluttering faintly in drafts, stone walls cold to the touch. You shiver, realizing grandeur often came at the price of comfort. This contrast shaped the psychology of guards. Many longed for the simplicity of peasant huts, where warmth was communal and close. Yet others prided themselves on enduring the hardships of the castle, proof of their toughness and loyalty. Sleeping in cold towers became a badge of honor, a mark that they were different from the villagers they once were. You settle back on your pallet, considering both worlds. The hut, smoky but warm. The castle, clean but cold. Each had its burdens, each its fleeting comforts. You tug your cloak tighter, wishing for the snug chaos of a cottage fire, but resigned to the icy grandeur of stone. And slowly, lulled by exhaustion, you drift into uneasy slumber once again, caught between the two worlds of medieval night. The thought of smoky cottages fades, and your mind turns to another influence on castle life, the routines shaped by monasteries. In the Middle Ages, castles and cloisters often stood side by side, and the discipline of monks left its mark on garrisons as well. Guards and monks lived in worlds divided by walls and duty, yet their nights were not so different. Both rose at odd hours, both endured cold stone dormitories, both relied on strict schedules to carry them through the long dark. One firmly established observation is that monastic houses set the rhythm of bells across medieval Europe. The canonical hours, matins at midnight, lauds at dawn, were marked by chimes that echoed beyond cloisters into castles nearby. Guards heard those bells and found their own nights punctuated, even if unwillingly, by the same rhythm. Just as monks shuffled into chill chapels to chant in the dark, soldiers shifted on their straw pallets, half awake, reminded that time never truly belonged to them but to the order of the bell. Something rather curious appears in accounts of mixed communities. Monks sometimes acted as moral overseers for garrisons, encouraging or demanding discipline in sleeping and waking. In certain castles held by bishops or abbots, guards were expected to follow routines not unlike monastic ones, rising at set hours, sleeping in communal dormitories, even keeping silence after nightfall. Imagine a group of weary soldiers, itching to laugh or curse, hushed by a monk gliding through the guardroom like a shadow, reminding them that silence was holy even in the bitter cold. Specialists remain divided about how strongly monastic habits influence secular castles. Some argue the overlap was profound, pointing to lords who borrowed monastic discipline to keep order among their men. Others insist soldiers lived by a rougher code, less concerned with piety and more with survival. The evidence is mixed, but the parallels are undeniable. Both monks and guards fought their own battles with sleep, hunger, and frost, guided by a shared culture of routine. Picture the sensory world of a monastic dormitory. Dozens of men in wool habits lie side by side on simple pallets, no fires permitted for fear of indulgence. The air is sharp, breath visible in the dark, silence broken only by coughs and the rustle of cloth. Guards in castles experience nearly the same. Rows of men on straw, cloaks pulled tight, forbidden fires risking punishment, silence heavy except for the groan of wind through arrow slits. In both places men prayed monks with psalms, guards with muttered charms that the cold would not claim them before dawn. There's even an odd tidbit about monks that trickled into guard culture. Some believed sleeping without too many blankets toughened the spirit, a form of holy endurance. Certain commanders echoed this idea, warning their men not to grow soft under too many furs. Imagine lying half frozen on your straw, grumbling that your misery was somehow good for your soul. It was a curious blend of faith and practicality, turning hardship into virtue. The rhythm of waking at intervals was another similarity. Just as monks rose for midnight prayers, guards woke for rotating shifts. In both cases, sleep was fractured, never whole, always broken by duty. The result was the same: men stumbling through dark halls, eyes heavy, minds dulled, bodies aching from cold. Both soldier and monk knew the strange twilight state of half sleep, half prayer, half watch. Sensory details made these parallels vivid: the sting of icy stone beneath bare feet, the musty smell of communal bedding, the muffled sound of snoring comrades, the faint glow of a candle guttering in the draught. Whether in cloister or castle, these details bound men together in shared endurance. Superstition tied them closer still. Monks warned against demons that prowled in the long night, whispering temptations into drowsy ears. Guards muttered the same warnings, though their demons took the shape of frost or enemy spies. Both feared what might slip past when vigilance faltered. Both trusted that strict routines, however harsh, were bulwarks against disaster. Now close your eyes and imagine lying in your castle guardroom, as bells toll faintly from a monastery beyond the walls. The sound drifts through the night, low and haunting, reminding you that others too are awake, others too shiver in stone halls. You pull your cloak tighter, whisper a prayer you learned as a boy, and let the rhythm carry you. The line between soldier and monk blurs in the dark. Both live by discipline, both sleep uneasily, both chase warmth in worlds of stone. For tonight, you are grateful for the rhythm itself. The tolling bells may wake you, the routines may grind you, but they also give shape to the endless night. Without them, you would drift, lost in cold and silence. With them, you endure, step by step, hour by hour, until dawn's light seeps through arrow slits and the long night finally loosens its grip. The echo of monastery bells fades, yet another sound creeps into the guardroom, one less physical, more unsettling. As the wind moans through the arrow slits and the brazier dies to ash, men begin whispering stories. In the medieval mind, the cold was not merely weather, it was alive, a force inhabited by spirits, demons, or the restless dead. You've heard comrades mutter about frost demons sneaking through cracks, or about the souls of the drowned drifting on winter winds. Superstition was a quilt just as real as straw or fur, covering men with both comfort and fear. A well-recorded belief across Europe was that cold nights drew spirits closer. Chronicles describe villagers staying indoors after dusk, muttering charms at windows to keep out the night air. Guards, bound to their posts, had no such refuge. To them, every icy gust could carry more than chill. It could be the breath of something watching. A guard curled under his cloak might whisper a prayer against frost, convinced it was more than weather gnawing at his bones. Something rather odd survives in folklore. Some soldiers swore that if frost formed on your eyelashes while you slept, it meant a ghost had brushed your face. Others said a man who woke with frozen hands had been grasped by the dead. Imagine waking in a stone tower, your fingers stiff, your breath fogging, and your comrades staring at you wide-eyed, muttering that a spirit had touched you in the night. Whether you laughed or shivered, the superstition sank deep. Debate lingers among scholars about how much weight to give these tales. Some argue that men truly feared spirits as part of nightly life, while others believe such stories were half-jokes, ways to lighten the misery of cold by giving it character. Perhaps both were true. Laughter by the brazier, prayers in the dark. The line between jest and faith blurred easily when frost numbed the senses. Picture the guardroom steeped in such stories. Men huddle close, cloaks drawn tight, telling one another of strange sounds in the corridors, of pale figures glimpsed on the battlements, of dogs growling at shadows no man could see. The brazier sputters, sparks flaring, as though agreeing with every tale. A draught slithers through the arrow slit, and everyone stiffens for a moment, eyes darting. Then someone coughs, mutters a joke, and the spell breaks, yet the unease lingers. The sensory impressions are vivid. You lie under your cloak, ears pricked to every creak of stone, every whistle of wind. The air smells faintly metallic, as if touched by ice. Your heart quickens when the dog at your side growls low, staring into the shadows. You know it is probably nothing, yet your fingers clench in your mittens, and you mutter a charm you barely remember from childhood. The night feels thicker, heavier, as though invisible eyes peer through the walls. There was a curious ritual in some garrisons. Guards spat into the brazier before sleeping, believing it drove away spirits lurking in the corners. Others crossed their swords over doorways, sure that no ghost could step past iron. A few even carried charms, bits of bone, carved wood, or knotted strings to tuck under pillows. Archaeologists have found small talismans in castle ruins, suggesting that faith in such protections was no idle talk. But superstition was not always fearful. Some believed cold winds carried blessings, that dreams born in frost were truer than others. A man who dreamt vividly on a winter night might rise, convinced he had received a vision. These hopeful twists gave men something to cling to, turning the cruelty of cold into the hand of fate. Close your eyes now, and imagine yourself caught between fear and comfort. The chamber is dim, shadows thick, the fire nearly out. A comrade whispers of ghosts in the battlements. Another laughs but pulls his cloak tighter. The dog at your side shifts uneasily, ears twitching at some sound beyond your hearing. You breathe slowly, convincing yourself it is only the wind, only the cold. Yet you whisper a prayer anyway, because the night feels long, and frost sometimes seems too cruel to be mere weather. As you drift into uneasy sleep, the stories coil in your dreams. Figures walk through stone corridors, their breath colder than the wind, their touch lingering on your skin. You stir, shiver, and clutch the dog closer, half awake, half dreaming. The superstition is alive around you, a blanket woven of fear and hope, reminding you that in a medieval castle, the cold was never just cold, it was something more, something imagined and real at once. The whisper of ghost stories lingers as you tug the cloak tighter, but not every explanation for the dangers of cold came from superstition. Medieval minds also leaned on the wisdom of physicians, healers, and medical texts to explain why some men froze while others survived. The cold was not only spiritual, it was humoral. Doctors of the age spoke in the language of balance, of hot and cold, wet and dry, and they offered remedies that guards sometimes followed faithfully, sometimes ignored with a shrug. One well-documented observation is that medieval medical theory insisted cold air was harmful to the lungs and brain. Texts warned that inhaling night air chilled the humours and invited melancholy or worse. To counteract it, physicians advised wrapping the head tightly at night and covering the chest with wool. Guards, hearing this advice filtered down from clerics or literate officers, often pulled hoods close around faces and slept with cloaks wrapped high. Whether or not they believed the science, the practice was practical. Something rather curious appears in surviving household manuals. Some recommended rubbing fat or oil on the skin before sleep. Goose fat, lard, even fish oil was smeared on feet and hands, believed to seal in warmth. Imagine a guard anointing his toes with grease before pulling on socks, the smell pungent but the effect surprisingly insulating. You might wrinkle your nose, but in the context of icy stone floors, it was worth the stench. Debate among historians continues about how much medical advice trickled into common guard life. Some argue that only nobles or wealthy officers could access written texts and expensive remedies like spiced wine or medicinal herbs. Others suggest that simplified practices like eating warming foods or keeping extremities covered spread widely through oral tradition. The truth likely lies between. Detailed prescriptions stayed with the elite, but everyday remedies filtered down to the men who shivered on the straw. Picture the sensory world of these remedies. A guard rubs oil into his hands, the slick sheen catching faint firelight. Another sips a cup of hot wine steeped with cinnamon, its aroma rich and foreign. A third chews on garlic cloves, muttering that physicians praised it as a warming food. The chamber fills with odd mingling scents: smoke, sweat, grease, spice, and pungent herbs. The air feels heavier, but the men swear it keeps them safe from the night's cruel bite. Medical advice often overlapped with diet. Doctors urged men to eat hot foods, onions, mustard, pepper before bed to stoke the inner fire. Guards complied when they could, tossing whatever spices they had into simple stews. A guard room after such a meal smelled fiercely of onion and pepper, enough to sting the eyes, but the men laughed through watering eyes, convinced they would sleep warmer for it. There was also the matter of posture. Some healers claimed men should not sleep flat on cold floors, but propped slightly upright, to prevent chill of the chest. Guards without beds improvised by leaning against walls, cloaks wrapped tightly, heads tilted onto shoulders. The result was poor rest, but perhaps less stiffness in the morning. Whether it truly helped or not, the belief spread widely enough to shape how men lay in the dark. One odd tidbit comes from a 15th century physician's note. He advised soldiers to keep a live chicken under the bed, its warmth believed to draw cold away from the body. Whether any guard actually followed such advice is uncertain, but you can almost picture it: a puzzled soldier curled on straw, a chicken clucking softly beneath, both enduring the night together. The sensory impressions of medical practice were layered onto nightly routines. Oils on skin made bedding sticky, spices burned in throats and noses. Strong-smelling herbs hung in pouches above pallets, believed to purify air. A guard lying beneath such a charm might breathe the sharp scent of sage or rosemary all night, half comforted, half annoyed, but convinced it offered protection. Even water was treated with suspicion. Physicians warned against drinking cold liquids at night, insisting they weakened the stomach's fire. Instead, guards sipped warmed ale or thin broth. You can imagine a weary man holding a steaming cup, nodding in agreement with wisdom he barely understood but trusted nonetheless. Close your eyes now and picture the chamber layered with these remedies. Guards rubbing grease on feet, others chewing garlic, others tying herbs into little bundles above beds. The smells are overwhelming. The practice is odd, but the intention is the same: to guard against cold that medicine described as an imbalance of humours. In their own way, these rituals gave men a sense of control. As you curl beneath your cloak, you think of all the advice: cover your head, eat onions, rub fat, sip warm drink. You chuckle softly, but you follow it anyway, because in the end, anything that promises warmth is worth trying. And as your eyelids drift closed, you feel the faint heat of oil on your hands, the spice still tingling in your throat, and you surrender to the uneasy sleep that medieval medicine promised would be just a little safer, a little warmer than without it. The memory of strange remedies clings to you: the smell of garlic, the slick feel of grease on skin. But as you nestle deeper into the straw, another thought rises. Not every guard endured the night equally. Social rank shaped warmth as much as wool or fire. A noble's bodyguard might fall asleep in relative comfort, while a common sentry froze in the same chamber only a few feet away. The cold, like so many things in the Middle Ages, was unevenly distributed. It is firmly established in household accounts that lords often provided better bedding and clothing to their personal retainers. These royal or noble guards sometimes slept on raised wooden frames, mattresses stuffed with down or feathers, and blankets lined with fur. Their cloaks were trimmed with fox or sable, their hose better woven, their boots sturdier. Such luxuries didn't make them immune to cold, but they softened its bite. Meanwhile, ordinary watchmen made do with flattened straw sacks and cloaks already patched and threadbare from long use. Something rather unexpected surfaces in a few chronicles. Nobles occasionally gifted their guards cast off garments, not from pity but from practicality. A cloak that had grown too shabby for a lord could still save the life of a soldier. Imagine a retainer wrapping himself in a velvet cloak, once bright but now faded, its warmth unchanged despite its frayed hem. The soldier would boast about the garment, not because it was pretty, but because it was warmer than anything he had owned before. Specialists remain divided about how wide this gap truly was. Some historians argue that elite guards enjoyed dramatically better conditions, nearly as fine as their masters, especially in royal courts. Others caution that even noble retainers endured freezing towers and drafty guardrooms, their luxuries only slightly better than those of common soldiers. The truth likely varied. A king's chamber guard in Paris might rest far more comfortably than a local lord's sentry in a remote border castle. Picture the sensory difference. At one end of the chamber, a noble's guard pulls heavy fur over himself, the pelt thick and soft, smelling faintly of musk. He stretches on a raised bed, the mattress yielding beneath him. His cloak is lined, his boots sturdy, his hood snug. Across the same room, a common watchman lies on bare straw, cloak threadbare, socks patched with scraps. His toes curl, aching with cold, while the noble's guard sighs into relative warmth. The contrast is not hidden, it is in every glance across the chamber, every rustle of finer cloth. And yet, even with disparity, bonds of service created peculiar moments. A noble might order his personal guard to share warmer quarters, while the rest of the garrison huddled elsewhere. But in emergencies, sieges, raids, bitter winter's lines blurred. Even the king's men found themselves shoulder to shoulder with ordinary soldiers, sharing whatever warmth they could. Cold was a great leveler when desperation rose high enough. One curious tidbit comes from a 14th century account in England. A royal guard complained not of freezing but of sweating, his bed so piled with furs that he awoke drenched. His comrades, half frozen nearby, muttered curses. It was a stark reminder that too much comfort could feel almost unnatural in a place of stone and steel. The disparity carried symbolic weight. To sleep warmly was to embody privilege, to display power even in rest. To shiver was to remember your station. Guards internalized this hierarchy. Some accepted it as natural, others grumbled quietly in the dark. But whether cushioned in feathers or curled on straw, all still listened to the same wind howling through the slits. All still feared frost gnawing at extremities. Now close your eyes and imagine yourself as both men. First, the favored guard, wrapped in fur, straw mattress lifted above the chill floor, dreaming easily while the fire glows nearby. Then, the common sentry, pulling a thin cloak tight, straw poking through fabric, dreams fractured by teeth chattering. Both lie in the same room, yet their nights are worlds apart. Still, the dawn that comes will treat them alike. The horn will sound, the watch will change, the cold will press again. Privilege softens the night, but never banishes it entirely. In a medieval castle, even the best-placed guard still woke with breath steaming in the air, reminded that stone cared nothing for rank. And so you, wrapped in whatever cloth you own, drift once more into uneasy sleep, grateful for any scrap of warmth, resentful of none, for survival itself is the only true privilege the cold will ever grant. The contrast between rich and poor guards lingers in your thoughts, but soon your mind drifts to those who were not permanent members of the garrison, the travellers, merchants, messengers, and wandering pilgrims, who sometimes found themselves inside castle walls after nightfall. Unlike seasoned sentries who knew every trick against frost, these temporary guests had to improvise, often under the watchful eyes of the very men trying to keep warm themselves. It is well documented that castles acted as weigher stations, royal messengers carrying letters, merchants bringing goods, or noble allies on the road might be offered a night's shelter. They were rarely placed in noble chambers unless their rank demanded it. More often, they were lodged in outbuildings, guest halls, or even in the same drafty guardrooms as the garrison. Sleeping arrangements depended on space and circumstance, and warmth was not guaranteed. Something rather curious emerges from travellers' accounts. Many brought their own bedding. A merchant might unroll a wool blanket carried in his pack, or a pilgrim might spread a cloak stiff with road dust. They learned quickly not to rely on castle hospitality for comfort. Imagine a weary rider arriving at midnight, shaking straw into a corner, and wrapping himself in his cloak while guards nearby smirked knowingly. He would soon learn the true chill of stone walls. Scholars remain divided about how generous castles were with their guests. Some argue that hospitality was a sacred duty, and even lowly travellers received straw, blankets, and access to fires. Others maintain that garrisons guarded their supplies jealously, offering little more than floor space. Archaeological finds of portable bedding, rolled mats, travelling blankets, even small folding frames suggest that travellers often prepared for the worst. Picture the sensory world of such improvisation. A traveller spreads his cloak in a corner, brushing aside musty straw left behind by others. He pulls a bag under his head as a pillow, its leather creaking. Around him, guards shift on their own pallets, some eyeing him with curiosity, others ignoring him entirely. The air smells of smoke, damp wool, and unfamiliar bodies. He shivers, unused to the unrelenting chill of castle stone, and curls tighter beneath his thin covering. Some guests sought warmth by drawing close to guards' fires. There are tales of messengers slipping coins to soldiers in exchange for a place near the brazier. The brazier glows red. Guards mutter about fairness, but the coin jingles in someone's purse, and the traveller sleeps easier. In the morning, the smell of smoke clings to his cloak, but he rises less stiff than he would have otherwise. A curious anecdote from a German castle notes that travellers were sometimes told to sleep in stables, not only to free up space, but because the warmth of animals was better than the stone chambers themselves. A pilgrim might curl into hay beside a horse, waking to a wet nose against his cheek, warmer than he would have been in the guardroom. Though humiliating to some, many accepted the arrangement gratefully. Hospitality carried risks as well. Guards grumbled about strangers bringing fleas or stealing blankets. Some castles imposed strict rules. Travellers were to surrender weapons before bedding down, and guards were ordered to watch them closely. For the guest, sleep came uneasily. Warmth traded for a sense of vulnerability under the eyes of men who could easily turn hostile. Close your eyes now and imagine yourself as one of these travellers. You have ridden all day through rain, your cloak damp, your bones aching. You enter the guardroom with relief, only to find the air colder than the stable you left behind. The guards wave you toward a corner where you spread straw hastily and wrap yourself in your cloak. You hear their laughter, their muttered stories, their snores as they drift off. You lie awake longer, teeth chattering, wondering if morning will ever come. For the seasoned guard beside you, the night is routine. For you, the traveller, it is a lesson in humility, a reminder that castles, though strong, were not built for comfort. Yet in the end, both of you share the same goal, to last until dawn without freezing. And as your eyes close at last, shivering under thin cloth, you realize you are now part of the same story of survival, bound by stone, straw, and cold. The image of shivering travellers fades, and your thoughts shift toward the families who sometimes lived within the castle walls. Not every guard was a solitary figure. Many brought wives and children with them, especially in long-term garrisons where service stretched over years. These women and children shared the same drafty chambers, the same icy stone, the same tricks of survival. A castle at night was not only a fortress, but also a strange, half-hidden home. It is a well-attested fact that in peacetime, garrisons often included households. Records of provisioning list not only bread and ale for soldiers, but also extra grain, cloth, and firewood for their dependents. Wives acted as laundresses, cooks, or nurses. Children fetched water, ran errands, or tended animals. At night, all of them faced the same cold as the men on watch, curling together in corners of towers or tucked into lofts above storerooms. Something rather touching emerges from accounts. Children often slept directly beside their fathers in guard chambers, burrowed under the same cloaks. Imagine a weary sentry returning from a shift, his boots still wet, lying down on straw with his small son pressed against him, both wrapped in one woolen blanket. The boy, already asleep, breathes evenly. The father, bone, tired, smiles faintly despite the cold. That closeness turned bleak rooms into places of fragile warmth. Specialists remain divided about how common these family arrangements were. Some argue that many castles were strictly military, barring women and children, except in times of siege. Others point to payroll records and household lists that clearly included families, suggesting they were far from rare. The truth may lie in the size and purpose of the castle. Frontier fortresses were often Spartan, but administrative castles in settled regions became miniature towns, families and all. Picture the sensory details of such a guardroom family. A mother sits near a brazier, mending socks by dim firelight, the smell of singed wool drifting in the air. Children tumble onto straw piles, giggling until a stern look hushes them. A guard, exhausted, dozes in a corner while his wife pulls a cloak over him. The room is thick with sounds. Crackle of fire, muffled laughter, the hiss of wind through the slits. The smell is layered smoke, sweat, milk from a goat tethered nearby, and the earthy tang of straw. One odd tidbit from a French castle roll mentions children being issued half rations of ale, watered and weak, to help them sleep in the cold. Imagine a drowsy child, sipping thin ale before curling against her mother's side, warmth rising in her cheeks, eyelids drooping as the wind howls beyond the walls. It is both strange and tender, a reminder that even the smallest shared in the customs of the garrison. For women, the battle with cold was no less fierce. Many worked while bundled in layers, skirts dragging through damp rushes. At night, they layered cloaks over their children, sometimes even cutting strips from their own garments to patch bedding. Some whispered charms against frostbite, others relied on faith, all while trying to create pockets of warmth where none naturally existed. The presence of families changed the psychology of guards as well. A soldier lying down beside his wife and children felt a different responsibility, to keep them alive as well as himself. He could endure misery alone, but watching a child shiver made the cold more cruel. It also made camaraderie stronger. Guards with families often shared extra fuel or food with those who did not, knowing the burden was greater. Superstition surrounded children especially. Some guards believed young ones attracted spirits of cold or sickness more easily, and so they placed charms under children's bedding, bits of iron, sprigs of rosemary, or even carved wooden crosses. Whether effective or not, these objects gave parents comfort in a world where medicine was scarce. Now close your eyes and picture such a night. You are not alone in the guardroom, but surrounded by the quiet chorus of a family's breathing. A child stirs in sleep, murmuring softly. A woman tucks a blanket tighter around her husband. The fire burns low, but its glow reflects in weary eyes. The chamber is still cold, draught slipping in, yet the presence of family reshapes it. The stone no longer feels like a prison, but a fragile shelter where warmth is measured not only in degrees but in closeness. You drift into sleep among them, your mind softened by the sound of a child's soft sigh, by the shared warmth of bodies huddled together, by the quiet determination of families who, against all odds, made even a castle's icy towers feel like a home. The gentle sighs of children fade into memory, and now your thoughts turn to the nights when comfort was stripped away entirely when the castle was under siege. In such times warmth became even rarer, food scarcer, and sleep more fragile. A guard on duty during a blockade faced not only cold stone and biting wind but also gnawing hunger, frayed nerves, and the ever-present fear of an enemy assault. To lie down and rest was to enter a world of deprivation, where survival meant enduring far more than frost. It is a well-recorded fact that sieges could last weeks, months, even years. Chronicles tell of castles where supplies dwindled so low that men burned furniture for fuel and ate rats to stave off starvation. In such conditions, warmth was nearly impossible to maintain. Fires were rationed carefully, smoke kept low so as not to reveal positions. Guards might find themselves sleeping without a brazier, their breath hanging white in the air, the straw beneath them thin from reuse. The cold pressed heavier when bellies were empty, for hunger stripped the body's fire as surely as wind stripped the skin. Something rather unexpected appears in siege accounts. Men sometimes slept in their armor. It was not only readiness for attack that demanded it, but also the peculiar comfort of steel. Though heavy and stiff, armor trapped body heat surprisingly well when worn with padding. Imagine a soldier collapsing after a long watch, helm set aside, but mail shirt and padded gambeson still clinging to his body. The weight pressed down, but the heat held in, a desperate compromise between safety and sleep. Scholars remain divided about whether armor was practical bedding. Some argue that exhaustion made men careless, wearing mail into slumber despite the stiffness it caused. Others suggest that commanders discouraged it, fearing rust from sweat and shortened life of the equipment. Yet accounts of sieges mention more than once that men were found asleep fully dressed, as though unwilling to risk either cold or surprise. Picture the sensory scene of a besieged guardroom. The fire is out, smoke smudges black against the ceiling, and the air smells of sweat, hunger, and damp straw. A guard lies shivering, belly empty, cloak thin from wear. Nearby, another gnaws on a hard crust, the sound sharp in the silence. Outside, the faint thud of enemy picks echoes, as sappers dig beneath the walls. Every sound sharpens the cold, every hunger pang makes the chill feel deeper. You tug your cloak tighter, but it cannot fill the hollow in your stomach. The psychological weight was crushing. In times of siege, men no longer trusted warmth to last. Straw rotted from damp, blankets grew riddled with vermin, and rations shrank to almost nothing. Some guards muttered that the cold itself was another enemy, working alongside hunger to break resolve. A soldier could fight men, but he could not swing a sword at frost or emptiness. Curious practices arose in these desperate times. Some garrisons rationed not only food, but sleep itself, forcing men to take shorter, harsher rotations so that more eyes stayed awake against attack. Others crowded men into tighter spaces, hoping body heat would stretch further when firewood ran out. Archaeological evidence of soot marks in unusual places like narrow passages or even latrines suggests that fires were lit in secret, small enough to warm a handful of guards without drawing enemy eyes. One chilling tidbit comes from a siege in northern France. Guards, too cold and too hungry, tore down doors from storerooms and burned them for warmth, despite knowing it weakened their own defenses. Imagine the crackle of a wooden door aflame, the momentary relief of heat, the lingering dread of having destroyed something vital just to live another night. Sensory impressions grew sharper in siege conditions. The cold smelled sharper, almost metallic, mixed with smoke from hidden fires. Hunger made every draught feel crueler, every gust like a slap. Straw bedding grew damp from condensation, and men lay closer together, hearing stomachs growl as loudly as snores. The chamber no longer smelled of porridge or ale, but of sweat and despair. Yet even here, men clung to routines. They whispered stories before sleep, sang soft songs to distract from the gnaw of hunger. Some prayed more fervently, believing divine warmth would shield them. Others fell into grim silence, bodies curled tightly, as if trying to vanish into their cloaks. Sleep, when it came, was thin and restless, broken by hunger pangs and sudden alarms. Now close your eyes and picture yourself in such a night. You are not merely cold, you are hollow with hunger. Your cloak hangs loose on your shoulders, your boots feel too big for feet that have grown gaunt. The straw beneath you is damp, the air unrelenting. You curl tightly, arms across your stomach, whispering a prayer that morning will bring relief, though you know the siege may stretch on for weeks. The cold, the hunger, the fear, all fuse together into one enemy. You surrender to exhaustion anyway, because sleep is the only escape left. For a few hours at least, you can drift into dreams where food is plentiful, fires roar, and warmth embraces you like summer Sunday, until the horn calls again, until duty drags you back to frost and famine. You allow yourself that fragile reprieve. The bleak memories of siege hunger drift from your thoughts, and you return to quieter nights when castles were not under attack, but when order and discipline still shaped how men slept. Guards were not free to choose their hours or their comforts entirely. They lived by rules, some written in ordinances, others enforced by custom. Even in their most private moments of rest, the rhythm of authority pressed down like another blanket, sometimes stifling, sometimes protective. It is well attested that many castles operated under garrison regulations, written or unwritten. A captain of the guard assigned watches, inspected fires, and ensured bedding was laid where it belonged. Men were often forbidden to move braziers at will, lest sparks set straw alight. Some ordinances even specified when cloaks could be issued from stores, and how many layers a man might keep for himself. Sleep, like wakefulness, was subject to command. Something rather curious emerges from a handful of surviving rules: punishments for sleeping out of turn. A sentry who abandoned his watch and curled up in the guardroom risked flogging, branding, or worse. Even in communal sleep, suspicion lurked. Guards were expected to wake at the toll of bells, to rise when ordered, to surrender warmth the moment duty called. Imagine drifting into slumber only to be shaken awake by a captain's boot, the lash waiting if you dared groan too loudly. Specialists still disagree about how strictly these rules were followed. Some argue that in major royal castles, inspections were frequent and harsh, discipline rigid. Others suggest that in small or remote garrisons, rules softened in practice. Captains turned a blind eye as long as men did not endanger the walls. Likely both are true. The letter of the law loomed, but its enforcement bent with circumstance. Picture the sensory world of a disciplined guardroom. The fire burns low but steady, carefully tended because regulations forbid it to blaze too high. Men lie in rows, each in his assigned spot, cloaks pulled over them. The air smells of smoke and oil, faintly acrid from armor laid nearby. The captain's steps echo as he checks the room, the clink of his sword a warning not to feign sleep too deeply. Even in rest, men remain aware of hierarchy sleeping. Yes, but sleeping under watch. There's a tidbit of humor in some accounts. Men caught dozing on duty were forced to perform humiliating penances. One chronicle describes guards made to carry buckets of cold water through the courtyard, barefoot, as punishment for nodding off. The irony was cruel. They were colder afterward than before, but the lesson lingered. Others were fined ale rations, the loss cutting deep, for warmth was not only wool and fire but also drink. Discipline extended to bedding itself. Some castles issued communal straw fresh at intervals, while others demanded men gather and replace it themselves. Straw was measured, rationed, even inspected. Guards joked about being treated like livestock, their bedding allotted with the same precision as horse fodder. Yet they complied, knowing neglect meant worse: vermin infestations, dampness, or outright sickness. The psychology of discipline mattered. Rules, though resented, created predictability. A guard might grumble about being woken for his shift, but he trusted that someone else would rise when his turn ended. A captain's insistence on neat rows of bedding and orderly fires gave a sense of control against the chaos of cold. Order was another layer of insulation, thin but meaningful. Superstition wove into this system too. Some captains insisted men cross themselves before sleep, or recite a short prayer. Others banned dice games in the guardroom, claiming they invited spirits. Whether rooted in faith or discipline, these rituals gave men a sense of being protected not just by walls, but by rules themselves. Now close your eyes and imagine yourself in such a night. You lie in your assigned place, straw rustling beneath you, cloak drawn tight. The brazier's glow is small but steady, its heat rationed carefully. You hear the captain's boots fade as he leaves the chamber. the door closing with a heavy thud. Around you, comrades shift and sigh, but none dare complain too loudly. The rules hold the night together. You breathe slowly, surrendering to sleep, grateful for order even as you resent its iron grip. In the end, discipline did not banish the cold, but it gave shape to survival. Without it, the guardroom might dissolve into chaos, fires burning too high, men sleeping too long, watch posts left empty. With it, life was harsher but steadier, the castle safer. And so, as you drift off beneath the weight of rules as much as cloaks, you accept that in a medieval castle, even sleep was an act of obedience, another duty carried out beneath the watchful eyes of stone. The image of captains pacing the guardroom fades, and your thoughts wander toward the structure itself, the architecture that shaped every draft, every breath of warmth, every shiver in the night. Castles were built for defense first and comfort second, and their very design made the battle against cold an everyday struggle. Sleeping in them was not just about blankets and cloaks, it was about navigating a space designed to be harsh. It is a firmly known fact that thick stone walls, often 2 or 3 meters across, were excellent at absorbing and holding damp. In summer, this made castles pleasantly cool, but in winter, it turned every chamber into a refrigerator. Guards lying against outer walls woke to frost blooming on the stones beside them. Damp seeped into straw, boots stiffened overnight, and cloaks picked up a permanent chill. The very material that kept enemies out seemed determined to gnaw the life from those within. Something unexpectedly practical shows up in records of construction. Wall niches and alcoves were sometimes fitted with small fireplaces or wall stoves. These were narrow flues that carried heat from a fire below into upper rooms. Guards stationed in towers with such features slept a little easier, though smoke often leaked through cracks. Imagine curling on your straw pallet, hearing the faint crackle of fire hidden inside the wall, and pressing your back against the warm patch of stone. Comfort, yes, but fleeting and uneven warm shoulders, freezing toes. Specialists remain divided about how intentional this warmth was. Some argue that wall stoves were designed for comfort, part of the garrison's habitability. Others believe they were primarily structural, carrying heat for lords' chambers above, with guards benefiting only by accident. Either way, their presence left marks soot-stained niches, scorched bricks, clues that warmth sometimes seeped into even the humblest rooms. Picture the sensory world of castle architecture at night. Wind whistles through arrow slits, designed to let archers shoot but now acting as funnels for icy drafts. Wooden shutters, when present, creak against their hinges, banging softly in storms. Ceilings soar high, losing precious warmth into dark rafters. The air smells of damp mortar and mildew, of straw long pressed against wet stone. You shift in your bedding, pulling your cloak tighter, but the castle itself feels alive, breathing cold down your neck, sighing through its cracks. Curious solutions appeared. Guards sometimes stuffed rags or moss into arrow slits to block drafts, though captains scolded them for risking visibility. Others hung spare shields or cloaks across openings. A few castles added wooden paneling along lower walls, a layer of insulation against the damp. These boards grew warped and dark with age, but to a shivering guard, even thin planks felt like a gift. There's an odd tidbit from Scandinavian castles. Some had sleeping platforms built directly into the thickness of walls. Men climbed into alcoves carved like bunks, enclosed on 3 sides by stone. These spaces trapped body heat effectively, though condensation often soaked bedding. Imagine sliding into a stone nook, straw beneath you, cloak pulled tight, your body heat filling the small cavity until it felt almost like a cave. Architecture also dictated sound. Thick walls muffled outside noise, making the guardroom feel isolated, but they amplified the echo of boots, coughs, and snores inside. Sleep was never silent. You might lie awake hearing a single drip of water from a leaky roof echoing like a drum. The stone itself carried sound in strange ways. sometimes convincing men that whispers came from nowhere, fueling both jokes and fears of spirits. The psychology of space mattered too. Vast halls intimidated, their emptiness making the cold seem worse. Small chambers comforted, even if cramped, because body heat clung to the air. Guards often preferred to sleep piled in corners rather than spread evenly, not only for warmth but to shrink the space around them. A corner, however drafty, felt less like a void than the middle of a great room. Superstition tied itself to stone as well. Some men swore certain walls were colder because they were haunted. Others believed alcoves held protective spirits. A guard might choose his sleeping spot carefully, avoiding a place where another had once frozen or died. Whether born of fear or memory, these choices shaped how straw was spread and cloaks laid down. Now close your eyes and imagine yourself within this architecture. You lie against a wall, its damp chill seeping through your cloak. Above, rafters vanish into darkness. An arrow slit moans with wind, rattling the shutter. Your straw rustles as you shift, tucking your feet away from a patch of frost. The stone around you is both fortress and foe, keeping you safe from enemies but pressing its cold relentlessly into your bones. You sigh, resigning yourself to another night inside walls that protect but never comfort. In the end, castle architecture was as much a player in the nightly struggle as fire, cloak, or food. Guards survived, not in spite of the stone, but within its terms, learning to use alcoves, shutters, and niches as allies when possible, cursing them when not. And so you drift into sleep once more, your dreams echoing with the sigh of drafts through arrow slits, the rumble of stone shifting in the cold, the breath of a building designed to defend but never to embrace. The cold of the stone walls seeps into your dreams, and when you stir awake again, you find yourself thinking not of walls or braziers, but of people, the comrades with whom you share every bitter night. No man sleeps alone in a garrison unless punished or cursed with solitary duty. Warmth, like laughter, is communal. The guardroom is not only a place of straw and cloaks, but a crucible of bonds forged in the fire of shared discomfort. It is a firmly attested detail from garrison life that men slept packed closely together. The reason was practical. Body heat multiplies when bodies touch. A row of guards, shoulder to shoulder, generated warmth no cloak could equal. Some chroniclers describe men lying like sardines in a barrel, pressed so tight that one man's movement woke the next. It was far from elegant, but it kept fingers and toes alive through nights when frost lay thick on the windows. Something rather endearing appears in anecdotal notes. Guards developed small rituals to make this intimacy bearable. Some muttered jokes before lying down. "Don't steal my warmth, you thief," while others swore loudly to keep boots away from their faces. Imagine a chamber filled with groans, laughter, curses, and eventually the deep sighs of surrender as men arranged themselves in human rows against the cold. Scholars continue to debate whether this practice was driven more by necessity or camaraderie. Some argue it was entirely practical, a survival tactic with no deeper meaning. Others point to the bonds recorded in chronicles, the loyalty, the shared jokes, the grief when one comrade did not wake as evidence that closeness at night built loyalty by day. Likely it was both. Warmth demanded it, but friendship grew from it. Picture the sensory world of a crowded guardroom. Straw rustles under a dozen bodies, the air heavy with the musk of wool and sweat. A man snores at your shoulder, another shifts restlessly at your back, pressing closer. Heat builds slowly, unevenly, one side of you warm, the other still chilled by drafts. The room smells of breath, damp cloth, and faint smoke. It is claustrophobic, yes, but it is also life-saving. There's a curious tidbit from a Burgundian garrison. Soldiers had a custom of singing softly as they settled down, one man beginning, others joining, until the whole chamber hummed with a low, tuneless chant. They claimed it lulled them to sleep and distracted from the cold. Imagine lying half awake, your body pressed among comrades, as a soft drone of voices rises and fades, like bees in a hive, until slumber finally claims you. Even quarrels softened in this closeness. Men who argued by day often found themselves shoulder to shoulder by night, forced into a truce by the cold. There was a saying among some guards: "Stone makes enemies friends by midnight." Warmth became the peacekeeper, uniting even rivals in grudging cooperation. The intimacy had its darker sides too. Lice and fleas spread quickly in crowded quarters, and one man's cough became everyone's sickness. Guards joked about borrowing fleas from neighbours, but outbreaks of disease were no laughing matter. Yet even with these risks, few chose distance. A man who slept alone in a cold corner out of pride often paid with sleeplessness, while his companions, itchy but warm, endured. The psychology of comradeship cannot be understated. To fall asleep surrounded by fellow guards was to feel protected. You knew that even if you slept too deeply, someone beside you might stir at a noise, shake you awake, or share an extra fold of cloak. Cold may have been relentless, but solidarity made it survivable. Now close your eyes and imagine yourself in that room. You lie between two comrades, one snoring, the other muttering in his dreams. Your shoulders touch, your legs press against theirs, warmth pooling where your bodies meet. You wrinkle your nose at the smell, grumble at the snores, but slowly your muscles relax. The draft still creeps through arrow slits, but the human wall around you shields most of it away. You breathe in unison with those beside you, lulled by the rhythm, soothed by the knowledge that you are not alone. In the end, comradeship was the castle's truest blanket. Straw rotted, fires died, cloaks tore, but the presence of men beside you endured. Together, you outlasted the night. And so, as your eyes close again, you drift into dreams of warmth, not born of wool or fire, but of shared breath and shared burden. The quiet bond of guards who learned that survival itself was a team effort. The memory of comrades pressed shoulder to shoulder still lingers when you stir again, but this time your thoughts wander upward to the towers and battlements where guards often dozed between their rounds. Unlike the relative shelter of a guard room, the open walls exposed men to the rawest elements, yet sleep sometimes crept in regardless. For a castle watchman, drowsing on the battlements could mean warmth stolen in fragments or death, if discovered. It is firmly recorded that guards were expected to remain alert through their shifts on the walls. Chroniclers mention punishments for those caught asleep at posts, some as harsh as execution, for a single lapse could doom an entire fortress. Yet human nature is stubborn, and in the endless monotony of a winter night, eyes drooped. Men leaned against merlons, slumped in corners of turrets, or crouched beside parapets with cloaks drawn high. These were not long sleeps, but stolen moments, fragile as sparks. Something rather curious shows up in scattered accounts. Guards used the warmth of stone itself to ease their vigil. Though walls radiated cold at night, during the day they absorbed sunlight. In early evening, a sentry might lean his back against sun-warmed masonry, enjoying a fleeting pocket of heat as darkness fell. Imagine pressing your shoulders to rough stone, still faintly warm beneath the chill, and dozing for minutes before the wind claimed it again. Scholars debate how common these battlement naps really were. Some argue they were rare, dangerous indulgences tolerated only in quieter regions. Others suggest they were unavoidable, even expected, so long as one eye cracked open now and then. Archaeological studies of tower alcoves with soot stains hint that small fires or lamps were sometimes hidden there, creating corners where guards could rest briefly between rounds. Picture the sensory details of such a vigil. The wind howls over the wall, pulling at your cloak, snapping its hem against your legs. Snow drifts across the parapet, crunching under boots. You crouch into a corner, knees hugged to chest, cloak pulled over your head like a tent. Your breath fogs beneath the fabric, warming your face slightly. The stone beneath you is hard, the draft relentless, but exhaustion drags at your eyes. You let them close for a moment, knowing it is dangerous, yet unable to resist. There's an odd tidbit from a 15th century English castle. Sentries sometimes stuffed straw into the gaps of their helmets to make impromptu pillows, leaning forward to nap while still half-seated. They joked about sleeping like owls, heads bowed, eyes hidden. The image is half comical, half desperate, a man clinging to scraps of rest while pretending vigilance. Psychology played a role too. Alone on a wall, silence pressing from every side, the temptation to drowse was irresistible. Guards sometimes sang softly to themselves, stamped feet in rhythm, or muttered prayers just to stay awake. But when fatigue overcame them, they curled in shadowed corners, trusting their comrades, or perhaps luck to keep them safe. The sensory world of a battlement sleep is harsher than any guardroom. Your cloak whips in the wind, icy flakes sting your face, the stone beneath numbs your limbs. You shift constantly, waking half a dozen times to stamp feeling back into your toes. Your ears strain at every sound, the creak of wood, the distant bark of a dog, the whistle of wind that sometimes mimics voices. Dreams blur into reality until you're not sure if the noise you heard was real or imagined. Superstition touched the battlements too. Some guards swore that sleeping too long in the open air risked your soul wandering, carried away by wind spirits. Others claimed dreams on the wall were prophetic, shaped by the endless sky. Whether warning or hope, these beliefs reminded men that sleep here was never ordinary. It belonged to the threshold between vigilance and vulnerability. Now close your eyes and imagine yourself as that weary sentry. You crouch in the lee of a merlon, cloak wrapped tight, straw padding your helmet against the stone. Your eyes droop, head nodding, until a sharp gust jolts you awake. You listen hard, heartbeat thudding, but hear only the wind. You sigh, close your eyes again, and slip into another brief doze. Minutes stretch uncertainly, cold gnaws at your fingers, but you endure. And when at last your relief comes, you stumble gratefully down the stairs, cloak stiff with frost, body aching, ready to collapse onto straw. In the end, battlement sleep was always uneasy, never safe. It was survival snatched in fragments, a compromise between duty and exhaustion. And as you finally curl once more in the guardroom, the memory of icy wind in your face follows you, a reminder that the walls that kept enemies out also kept guards awake, sleepless and forever at war with the night itself. The bitter memory of icy battlements clings to you, but now your thoughts drift inward to the strange dreams that haunted guards when they finally collapsed into restless sleep. Fatigue, hunger, superstition, and the sting of cold all twisted the mind, shaping visions that felt as real as the stones beneath. Sleep in a medieval castle was never deep or easy. It was fractured, filled with images born of hardship. It is a firmly observed truth from chronicles and letters that men often recorded vivid dreams during harsh winters. The lack of steady warmth, combined with broken sleep from rotations, left their minds fragile. Dreams became sharper, stranger, etched into memory. Some saw feasts laid out in glowing halls, steaming meats and flagons of ale just beyond reach. Others dreamt of fire blazing warmly, only to wake with fingers numb, breath misting white. Hunger and cold wrote their own theatre in the mind. Something oddly fascinating emerges from folklore. Guards sometimes claim their dreams warned them of danger. One account tells of a sentry who dreamt of shadows scaling walls. Hours later, raiders were indeed spotted outside. Whether coincidence or sharpened intuition, comrades believed him, whispering that the cold itself opened a window to prophecy. Imagine lying on your straw, shivering, then waking from a dream of flames or spirits, unsure whether it was vision or fever. Scholars debate how much stock to place in these dream reports. Some argue they were exaggerations, storytelling after the fact. Others believe sleep deprivation and physical stress genuinely heightened awareness, making guards more prone to startling insights. The truth may lie between. Dreams were half born of physiology, half fed by faith and fear. Picture the sensory experience of such slumber. You lie curled beneath a cloak, straw pricking through the fabric. Your stomach growls, your toes ache, and at last you drift off, The dream comes swiftly. You stand in a hall of light, warmth flooding your skin, voices laughing around you. You reach for food, for a cup of wine, but the vision flickers. Suddenly the hall crumbles, stone turning to frost, laughter to howling wind. You wake with a start, body trembling, realizing the dream was nothing more than your mind clutching at comfort. There's a curious tidbit from a 14th century manuscript. A guard claimed he was visited in dreams by St. Martin, who spread his cloak over him. The next morning, he found himself less cold than his comrades, and he swore it was no accident. Stories like these passed quickly through garrisons, giving hope that holy figures might intervene in the long night. Dreams also reflected the intimacy of the guard room. Men pressed shoulder to shoulder, often dreamt in parallel. One stirred, muttered of fire or food, and another beside him whispered the same vision later. Guards joked that dreams travelled like fleas, leaping from man to man in the dark. Yet beneath the humour was awe that shared hardship created shared illusions, as if their minds were huddled together as tightly as their bodies. Superstition-coloured interpretation. Dreams of warmth were good omens, said to promise survival. Dreams of ice creeping into rooms foretold sickness or death. Guards whispered these judgments to one another at dawn, weighing them against the day's duties. To dream of one's family was comforting. To dream of a black dog was considered a warning. The cold shaped both the images and the meanings assigned to them. Now close your eyes and imagine yourself sinking into such a dream. The wind howls outside, but in your mind a golden hearth roars, sparks leaping, heat soaking your bones. You stretch your hands toward it, sighing in relief. But then the fire fades, replaced by frost racing across the floor, climbing the walls, reaching for your skin. You wake, heart pounding, cloak clutched tighter. Around you, others stir and mutter, their faces pale in dim firelight. The dream has left its chill behind. For guards, dreams were not mere fantasies. They were extensions of the cold, echoes of hunger, reflections of fear, and sometimes they were the only escape. A man who dreamed of warmth carried that memory into the next watch, a fragile shield against despair. In a world where stone and frost seemed unbreakable, dreams gave a fleeting illusion of light. And so you drift once more, half comforted, half haunted, into another vision born of exhaustion. The castle breathes around you, its draughts whispering into your sleep, its chill turning into phantoms that stalk your mind. Dreams, strange and vivid, are as much a part of the night as fire, straw, or cloak, and like them, they help you endure until dawn. The strange, flickering dreams of fire and frost dissolve, and now you find yourself at the very edge of the night, where sleep blurs into survival, and survival blurs into memory. In all the routines and rituals, straw bedding, furs, fires, comradeship, superstition, you sense the thread that holds it all together. The sheer resilience of men forced to rest inside stone fortresses never meant for comfort. A medieval castle protected its people from arrows and sieges, but it offered no kindness against the relentless cold. Guards had to create that kindness themselves, one night at a time. It is a firmly established truth that castles were marvels of defense, yet poor shelters for warmth. The same features that made them strong, thick stone, high ceilings, arrow slits made them brutal to sleep in. Records from across Europe echo with the same laments. The wind pierces through the walls, one scribe wrote, and no cloak nor fire suffices. For guards, those laments were not words but lived reality. Every night was a negotiation between the cold's cruelty and the small strategies that blunted it. Something unexpectedly human emerges from these fragments of evidence. The laughter that accompanied the hardship. Even in the chill of drafty chambers, guards found humour. They teased one another about snoring like pigs, joked about fleas hopping from cloak to cloak, sang songs as they lay shoulder to shoulder. Cold may have been relentless, but camaraderie turned it from an enemy into an adversary, something they could mock, endure, and eventually outlast. Scholars continue to debate how effective these survival methods truly were. Did furs, curtains, braziers, and crowded sleep truly keep men safe from hypothermia? Or did sheer toughness play the greater role? Some argue that constant adaptation, changing shifts, eating fatty foods, layering wool was enough. Others insist many men still fell ill or died, their endurance exaggerated by later romantic accounts. The question remains unresolved, and perhaps that uncertainty reflects the very fragility of their nights. Picture the sensory collage of a final medieval night. Straw rustles under bodies, the air thick with smoke and sweat. A brazier glows faintly in the corner, its embers cracking. Dogs shift and sigh among the men, tails thudding softly. A draught sighs through the arrow slit, tugging at curtains, stirring the firelight. Children murmur in their sleep. Wives tuck blankets tighter. Guards groan and stretch. The smell is layered. Wool, damp stone, garlic from supper, fur musky with lanolin. It is not pleasant, but it is alive. There's an odd tidbit from a later chronicle. One old guard, reminiscing, swore that he missed those nights in the cold tower more than any feast. For there I learned brotherhood, he wrote, and the warmth of men together. His words hint at what the castle nights truly forged, not comfort, but connection. The cold pressed so hard that men discovered how to rely on one another utterly, in ways few modern beds could demand. Superstition lingered even in those final hours before dawn. A man waking to frost on his lashes might cross himself quickly, muttering that spirits had passed by. Another, dreaming of warmth, whispered to his neighbour that they would surely survive the winter. Belief, no matter how irrational, was another layer of insulation. Thin, fragile, but sometimes enough to carry a man through. Now close your eyes and imagine yourself at the very end of a night watch. The horn has not yet sounded, but you can sense dawn approaching. The fire has burned to ash, the brazier cold. Your cloak is heavy with damp. Straw pokes at your side. Your toes ache. Yet you hear the steady breathing of comrades, the soft sigh of a dog at your feet, the faint crackle of frost easing on the walls. The worst is passing. And then, faint at first, light slips through the narrow slit, grey, pale, but light nonetheless. You stir, rubbing your eyes, breath still misting, but the promise of day warms you more than the cloak does. Soon, the captain will call, the next routines will begin, and the castle will hum with life again. But for this fragile moment, you have endured another night without freezing. And so, the long journey through those frozen chambers comes gently to a close. You have walked beside the guards as they wrapped themselves in cloaks, huddled under furs, shared warmth with comrades and dogs, whispered prayers against spirits, and dozed uneasily on battlements. You have felt the stone's damp chill, heard the sigh of wind through arrow slits, smelled the mingling of straw, smoke, and wool. These nights were harsh, unforgiving, yet filled with small acts of survival that made life possible. As the narrative slows, let your own breath grow slower too. Inhale gently, as though drawing in the warmth of a brazier. Exhale as though releasing the long cold of a stone chamber. The guards you imagined are long gone. Their nights survived, their watch ended. What remains is the echo of resilience, the reminder that even in the harshest places, people found ways to endure, together. The flicker of fire fades now, the rustle of straw softens, the sound of boots, of bells, of distant horns drifts away. All that is left is the steady rhythm of breath, the comforting weight of a blanket, and the knowledge that dawn always comes, no matter how long the night. Let yourself sink deeper, as though into a cloak heavy with fur, as though into straw warmed by comrades' bodies. The stone walls of imagination grow faint, dissolving into gentle shadow. You are safe, you are warm, and you are ready to rest. Sleep well, dream softly, and may your night be kinder than those endured by guards in cold towers long ago.